In the frost-bitten winter of 1928, St. Mary Mead hides dark secrets beneath its quaint charm. Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-edged spinster with a knack for unraveling mysteries, uncovers a web of deceit from ghostly footsteps and vanishing treasures. 2 blackmail letters and hidden caches. Each chapter pulls you deeper into a village where every shadow conceals a human motive, and Marple's diary holds the key to exposing greed, betrayal, and scandal in just 30 seconds of gripping suspense. Chapter 1. The shadow in the vicarage. The village of St. Mary Mead lay quiet under a late September sky. Its cottages and winding lanes bathed in the soft, golden light of autumn. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and damp leaves, and the church bells tolled gently, marking the hour as evening crept in. To an outsider, it was the picture of pastoral serenity, a place where nothing ever happened. But Miss Jane Marple, seated by her window with a ball of wool and her knitting needles, knew better. St. Mary Mead, for all its charm, was a place where secrets simmered beneath the surface, waiting for a keen eye to uncover them. Miss Marple's cottage, a neat little affair with roses climbing the trellis, was her sanctuary. Her parlour was cosy, with lace curtains, a well-worn armchair, and a small writing desk tucked in the corner. On that desk sat her diary, a leather-bound volume with yellowing pages, its existence known to no one. It was here, in the quiet moments, after tea, that Miss Marple recorded her observations, not the idle gossip of the village, but the subtle, often chilling truths she pieced together from it. Tonight, as the light faded, she felt a familiar prickle of unease. Something was amiss in St. Mary Mead, and her diary would soon hold the key to a mystery that would shake the village to its core. She opened the diary, her fingers steady despite her years, and began to write. September 23rd, 1928. The vicarage has been unusually quiet these past weeks, but today I saw something that troubles me. A shadow, fleeting but unmistakable, passed the vicarage window just after dusk. It was not the vicar, nor his wife, nor any of the staff. It moved with purpose, yet it did not belong. I shall watch closely. Miss Marple set her pen down and gazed. Out the window, the vicarage stood across the lane, its ivy-clad walls glowing faintly under the rising moon. The vicar, Reverend Leonard Clement, was a kind man, if a bit distracted, and his wife, Griselda, was a lively young woman who brought a spark to the village. But the vicarage had always been a magnet for trouble, or so it seemed to Miss Marple. She had seen too many odd occurrences there over the years, small things, easily dismissed by others, but to her they were threads in a larger tapestry. The next morning, as Miss Marple tended her garden, she overheard Mrs. Price, the postmistress, chatting with Mrs. Weatherby, the baker's wife, by the garden gate. Their voices carried on the crisp air, sharp with the kind of excitement that only fresh gossip could bring. "Did you hear about the vicarage?" Mrs. Price said, her eyes wide. "They say there's been a prowler. Griselda saw someone lurking near the garden last night, bold as brass." Mrs. Weatherby gasped, clutching her basket. "A prowler? In St. Mary Mead? What's the world coming to?" Miss Marple's pruning shears paused mid-snip. A prowler. The word was vague, but it aligned with the shadow she'd seen. She kept her expression neutral, knowing better than to join the conversation. People talked more freely when they thought she wasn't listening. Instead, she tucked the information away, her mind already sifting through possibilities. By noon, the village was abuzz. The news of the prowler had spread, embellished with each retelling. Some said it was a thief scouting the vicarage. Others whispered of a jilted lover seeking revenge. Miss Marple, sipping tea at the Blue Boar Inn, listened to the chatter with her usual air of mild disinterest. But her ears caught every word, and her mind was anything but idle. That afternoon, she called on Griselda at the vicarage, bringing a jar of her homemade gooseberry jam as an excuse. Griselda welcomed her warmly, her dark hair slightly askew, and her dress a touch too bright for a vicar's wife. The vicarage drawing-room was cheerful, with chintz curtains and a fire crackling in the hearth, but Miss Marple noted a tension in Griselda's smile. "Jane, how lovely to see you," Griselda said, pouring tea. "I suppose you've heard the talk about our prowler." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but alert. "The village is quite stirred up. What did you see, my dear?" Griselda shivered slightly, though the room was warm. "It was just after dinner. I was closing the curtains when I saw someone in the gardener man, I think, though it was too dark to be sure. He was near the yew hedge, just standing there. When I called out, he vanished." "Did you tell Leonard?" Miss Marple asked, stirring her tea. "Oh yes, but you know how he is. Says it was probably just a tramp passing through. He's more worried about his sermon for Sunday." Griselda laughed, but it was brittle. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning. A tramp was possible, but tramps didn't linger in vicarage gardens without reason, and the shadow she'd seen had moved with purpose, not the aimless wandering of a vagrant. She made a mental note to check the garden herself. Later that evening, as the village settled into its nightly routines, Miss Marple slipped out with her shawl and a small flashlight. The vicarage garden was a tangle of roses and overgrown shrubs, perfect for concealment. She moved quietly, her steps sure despite her age, and examined the ground near the yew hedge. The soil was soft from recent rain, and there, unmistakable, were footprints, deep, deliberate, and belonging to a man's boots. They led toward the vicarage wall, then stopped abruptly, as if the intruder had scaled it. Miss Marple's lips pursed. This was no casual prowler. Someone had been watching the vicarage, and they'd taken care to leave no trace beyond those prints. She returned home, her mind racing, and opened her diary again. The footprints confirm it. Someone is watching the vicarage, and they are no stranger to stealth. I must learn more about the household, Leonard, Griselda, their staff, and any visitors. The answer lies there, I'm sure of it. Over the next few days, Miss Marple made discreet inquiries. She chatted with Mary, the vicarage maid, while buying eggs at the market, and learned that a guest had stayed at the vicarage 2 weeks prior, Mr. Lawrence Redding, a painter from London with a charming smile and a restless manner. Mary had overheard him arguing with the vicar late one night, though she couldn't make out the words. Miss Marple also spoke with Mr. Hawes, the curate, who mentioned that the vicar had seemed preoccupied lately, often locking himself in his study. The village, meanwhile, grew more agitated. Another sighting of the prowler was reported, this time near the churchyard. And old Mr. Archer, the sexton, swore he'd seen a figure in a dark coat slipping through the graves. Miss Marple, attending a Women's Institute meeting, listened. As the theories grew, wilder-ghosts, smugglers, even a foreign spy, she smiled faintly, knowing that the truth was likely more mundane but no less dangerous. On the 5th day, the mystery deepened. A letter arrived at the vicarage, slipped under the door in the dead of night. Griselda, pale and shaken, showed it to Miss Marple during a visit. It was written in a jagged hand, the ink smudged as if written in haste. "Leave St. Mary Mead, or you'll regret it." This is your only warning. No signature, no clue to the sender. Miss Marple studied the letter, noting the cheap paper and the faint scent of tobacco clinging to it. "Have you shown this to the police?" she asked. Griselda shook her head. "Leonard says it's just a prank, but I'm not so sure. Jane, what do you think?" Miss Marple hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's best to be cautious, my dear. Keep this safe and don't speak of it yet. I'll look into it." That night, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her diary open. She wrote, "The letter changes things. It's a threat, and a bold one. The prowler, the footprints, the letter, they're connected, and I suspect Mr. Redding may know more than he lets on. I must find out why he argued with Leonard, and what brought him to St. Mary Mead." The next morning, Miss Marple visited the village library, where she knew Mr. Redding had spent time sketching. The librarian, Miss Hartnell, was a font of information, eager to share what she'd observed. "He was always drawing the church," she said, "but he asked odd questions about the vicarage, the vicar's habits, even the old crypt. I thought it strange for an artist." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. The crypt, long unused, was beneath the church, accessible only through a locked door in the vestry. Why would a painter care about it? She thanked Miss Hartnell and made her way to the church, where she found Mr. Archer sweeping the steps. "Mr. Archer," she said pleasantly, "have you noticed anyone near the crypt lately?" The old sexton frowned. "Funny you should ask, Miss Marple. I found the vestry door ajar 2 nights ago, though I'm sure I locked it. Nothing was taken, but it gave me a turn." Miss Marple nodded, her mind piecing together the fragments. The prowler, the letter, the cryptid was all part of a pattern, though the picture was still unclear. She returned home and wrote in her diary, "The crypt is the key, I think. Something is hidden there, or someone believes it is. I must speak to Mr. Redding, but carefully. He's clever, and clever men are dangerous when cornered." The following day, Miss Marple contrived to meet Lawrence, reading at the Blue Boar, where he was staying. He was a handsome man, with sharp blue eyes and a quick smile, but there was a restlessness about him that put her on guard. She mentioned the prowler casually, watching his reaction. His smile didn't falter, but his fingers tightened around his glass. "Village gossip," he said lightly. "Probably just kids playing tricks." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild, "but the vicarage seems to attract trouble. You were there recently, weren't you?" Reading's eyes flickered, but he recovered quickly. "Just a brief visit. The vicar's a good sort, if a bit dull." Miss Marple smiled, letting the conversation drift to other topics. But she'd seen enough. Reading was hiding something, and she intended to find out what. That night, the village was shaken by a new development. Mary, the vicarage maid, was found unconscious in the garden, a bruise on her temple. She'd been fetching coal from the shed when someone struck her. The police were called, and Inspector Slack, a brisk man with little patience for village quirks, took charge. He questioned everyone at the vicarage, but no one had seen anything. Miss Marple, visiting the vicarage to offer her sympathies, overheard Inspector Slack muttering about damned nosy villagers. She ignored the jab, focusing instead on Mary, who was recovering with a cup of tea. "Did you see who hit you, dear?" Miss Marple asked gently. Mary shook her head, her voice trembling. "It was dark, Miss. I heard footsteps, then something hit me, that's all." Miss Marple patted her hand, but her mind was elsewhere. The attack on Mary was no accident. It was a warning, or perhaps a distraction. She returned home and wrote, "The attack on Mary confirms my fears. Someone is desperate to keep their secret hidden. The crypt, the prowler, the letter, and now this, it's all connected. I must act quickly before someone else is hurt." Over the next week, Miss Marple worked tirelessly, her frail appearance belying her determination. She spoke with everyone who might have seen something: Mrs. Price, Mr. Archer, even the children who played near the church. She learned that Redding had been seen near the vicarage late at night, and that he'd asked about old parish records in the library. She also discovered that the vicar had been receiving anonymous letters for weeks, though he'd kept them secret even from Griselda. The breakthrough came on a rainy afternoon, when Miss Marple slipped into the church to examine the crypt. The vestry door was locked, but she'd borrowed a key from Mr. Archer, claiming she wanted to check the hymnals. The crypt was damp and cold, its stone walls lined with ancient tombs. In a corner, half hidden by cobwebs, she found a loose flagstone. Beneath it was a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her heart quickened as she unwrapped it. Inside was a locket, engraved with the initials EM, and a folded letter, yellowed with age. The letter was addressed to my dearest, and spoke of a scandaler child born out of wedlock, hidden away to protect a family's reputation. The names were vague, but the implications were clear. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep this secret buried. Miss Marple replaced the bundle and returned home, her mind racing. The locket and letter were old, but their discovery now suggested someone was searching for them more, trying to destroy them. She wrote in her diary, "The locket and letter point to an old scandal, one that someone fears will resurface. Redding's interest in the crypt, the attack on Mary, the threats to the vicariate, all centers on this secret. I must confront Redding, but I need proof." The next day, Miss Marple invited Reading to tea, knowing he couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion. She set the scene carefully, her parlour cozy, her manner disarming. As they chatted, she steered the conversation to the vicarage, mentioning the crypt and watching his reaction. "You've been sketching the church, haven't you?" she said. "Such an old place, full of secrets. The crypt, for instance, quite fascinating." Redding's smile faltered. "Just an old pile of stones, Miss Marple. Nothing worth sketching." "Oh, I don't know," she said, her eyes bright. "Old places hide old stories. Like a locket, perhaps, or a letter that could ruin someone." For a moment, Reading froze. Then he laughed, too loudly. "You've been reading too many novels, Miss Marple." But she saw the fear in his eyes, and she knew she was close. That night, she wrote, "Redding knows about the locket. He's involved, but he's not alone. The vicar's silence troubles Mead as he no more than he admits. Tomorrow, I must speak to Leonard." The next morning, Miss Marple found the vicar in his study, surrounded by books and papers. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Leonard, I've found something in the cryptolocket and a letter. They're tied to a scandal, and I believe someone is threatening you over it." The vicar paled, his hands trembling. "Jane, you don't understand. That locket, it's tied to my family, to my mother. She made a mistake long ago. I thought it was buried, but Redding came asking questions. He said he'd expose it unless I paid him." Miss Marple's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "And the letters, the prowler?" "I don't know," Leonard said, his voice breaking. "I thought it was just Redding, but now I'm not sure. Miss Marple left the vicarage with a heavy heart. The pieces were falling into place, but the danger was far from over. That night she sat by her window, her diary open, and wrote, "The vicar's confession confirms Redding's role, but I fear he's not the only one. The attack on Mary, the prowler's persistency, suggests another hand at work. I must set a trap, and soon." The next evening, Miss Marple arranged for a rumour to spread that the vicar had found something valuable in the crypt and planned to move it. She enlisted Griselda's help, knowing the young woman's knack for gossip would ensure the news reached the right ears. Then she waited, hidden in the church with Mr. Archer, who'd agreed to keep watch. At midnight, a figure slipped into the vestry, a man, tall and lean, with a dark coat. It wasn't Redding. Miss Marple's breath caught as she recognized Mr. Hawes, the curate. He knelt by the flagstone, prying it up with a crowbar. Before he could retrieve the bundle, Mr. Archer stepped forward, his lantern blazing. "Stop right there, Mr. Hawes," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm. Hawes spun around, his face pale. "Miss Marple, this isn't what it looks like." "I think it's exactly what it looks like," she said. "You've been watching the vicarage, sending those letters, even attacking poor Mary to keep her quiet. You knew about the locket, didn't you? And you wanted it for yourself." Hawes's shoulders slumped, and he sank to the floor. "It wasn't just me," he muttered. "Reading put me up to it. He said the locket would make us rich. Blackmail, you see. The vicar's family would pay anything to keep it quiet." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. "And you thought you could double-cross him?" Hawes said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. The next morning, Inspector Slack arrested both Hawes and Redding. The locket and letter were handed over to the vicar, who burned them in the vicarage fireplace, his face etched with relief and shame. The village, predictably, buzzed with the scandal. But Miss Marple stayed quiet, letting the gossip swirl without her. That night, she opened her diary one last time for this mystery. "The case is closed, but the village will talk for weeks." Hawes and Reading underestimated St. Mary madamned me. "The locket is gone, the secret's safe, but I wonder how many more lie hidden in this quiet place. I shall keep watching." Miss Marple closed the diary and placed it back on her desk. The village was calm again, for now, but she knew it wouldn't last. St. Mary Mead was never as quiet as it seemed, and her diary would be ready when the next mystery came. Chapter 2. The Whisper in the Woods. The autumn chill had settled deeper into St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a mist that clung to the hedgerows and blurred the outlines of its thatched cottages. The days grew shorter, and the evenings carried a quiet that felt heavier than usual, as if the village itself were holding its breath. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlour with her knitting, sensed it keenly, a subtle shift in the air, a ripple of unease that no one else seemed to notice. Her diary, tucked safely in its drawer, had recorded the resolution of the vicarage affair only weeks ago, but already she felt the stirrings of a new mystery. Something was brewing, and it was not the pleasant anticipation of the harvest festival. She opened her diary, her pen moving with the same deliberate care she applied to her knitting. October 15th, 1928. The village is restless, though no one speaks of it directly. There's a whisper of something amiss in the woods beyond Meadow Lane. Children avoid the path there now, and even Mrs. Price, never one too shy from gossip, lowers her voice when she speaks of it. I must investigate. The woods in question lay on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead, a dense tangle of oak and beech that bordered the estate of Colonel Bantry, a jovial man whose wife, Dolly, was one of Miss Marple's closest friends. The woods were a favourite haunt for children picking blackberries or playing hide-and-seek, but recently stories had begun to circulate strange noises at dusk, a fleeting figure among the trees, and a sense of being watched. Miss Marple, ever skeptical of ghost tales, suspected something more tangible lay behind the whispers. The next morning, she set out for a walk, her stout shoes crunching on the gravel path that led to Meadow Lane. She carried a basket, ostensibly to gather late blackberries, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the undergrowth for signs of disturbance. The woods were quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a thrush. She followed the path deeper, noting broken twigs and trampled grasmall signs, but to her trained eye, they spoke of recent passage. At the edge of a clearing, she paused. There, half hidden by brambles, was a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn. It was coarse, grey wool, not the sort worn by villagers out for a stroll. She tucked it into her basket, her mind already turning over possibilities. A poacher, perhaps, or someone hiding from prying eyes. She continued her walk, her senses alert, until she reached the Bantry estate, where she hoped Dolly might have heard something useful. Dolly Bantry welcomed her with a warm smile. Her drawing room a cheerful chaos of cushions and half-read novels. "Jane, you're a sight for sore eyes," she exclaimed, pouring tea. "What brings you out on such a chilly day?" "Oh, just a walk," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "The woods are lovely this time of year, though I hear they've been unsettling lately." Dolly's eyes widened. "You've heard then? The servants are all in a tizzy about it. One of the maids swears she saw a man in the woods last week, lurking near the old quarry. She says he vanished when she called out." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "A man, you say? Did she describe him? Tall, dark coat, face hidden by a scarf." She was quite shaken. "Poor thing. Arthur thinks it's just poachers, but I'm not so sure. There's something odd about it." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the details. A man in a dark coat, much like the figure seen in the vicarage affair. Could it be connected? She doubted. Treading and Hawes were safely in custody, but the coincidence nagged at her. She thanked Dolly and promised to return for the harvest festival, her mind already mapping out her next steps. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped by the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with her usual air of importance. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, adjusting her shawl. "I hear there's been talk about the woods. Have you seen anything unusual?" Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful. Young Tommy Pierce says he saw lights in the woods 2 nights ago flickering, like someone signalling. And Mrs. Weatherby's dog won't go near the path anymore. It's not natural, I tell you." Miss Marple smiled faintly, encouraging Mrs. Price to continue. By the time she left, she'd gathered more fragments, a broken lantern found near the quarry, a strange smell of smoke in the air, and a rumour that someone had been digging in the woods. Each piece was small, but together they formed a pattern she couldn't yet fully see. That evening, she wrote in her diary, "The woods are hiding something, or someone. The fabric, the lights, the digging it, suggests a purpose, not mere chance. I must learn more about the quarry and who might have reason to be there the next day." Miss Marple visited the village school, where Tommy Pierce, a freckled boy of 12, was eager to share his story. "I saw them lights, miss," he said, his eyes wide, like someone waving a torch back and forth. It was near the quarry, past the big oak. I didn't stick around to see more. Did you see anyone, Tommy? Miss Marple asked, offering him a peppermint. He shook his head. Too dark. But I heard voices, 2 men, I think, talking low, sounded angry. Miss Marple thanked him and made her way to the quarry, a disused pit on the edge of the woods where slate had once been mined. The path was overgrown, and the air grew colder as she descended into the clearing. The quarry was a stark, silent place, its walls pitted and scarred. She moved carefully, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the base of a crumbling wall, she found what she was looking for: fresh earth, recently turned, and the faint outline of a shallow hole. Someone had been digging, and not for slate. She knelt, ignoring the damp seeping through her skirt, and examined the soil. Mixed with the dirt were flecks of ash and a sliver of metal, part of a clasp, perhaps, or a button. She tucked it into her basket alongside the fabric, her mind racing. Digging in the quarry, lights in the woods, angry voices. This was no poacher's work. Someone was searching for something, or hiding it. That night, she wrote, "The quarry is the heart of it. Something is buried there, or was." The clasp suggests a bag or case, perhaps discarded in haste. I must find out who has been seen near the woods and what they might want. The following morning, Miss Marple called on Colonel Bantry, knowing his estate overlooked the woods. He was in his study, surrounded by hunting trophies and maps, and greeted her with his usual bluff cheer. "Jane, what's this I hear about you poking around the woods? Dolly says you're on the scent of something." Miss Marple smiled, deflecting the question. "Just curious, Arthur. Have you noticed anyone unusual on your land? Near the quarry, perhaps?" The colonel frowned, rubbing his chin. "Now you mention it, one of the gamekeepers saw a stranger. Last weeker, rough sort, city clothes, not local. He was near the quarry, but when the keeper called out, he skid." "Did he describe him?" Miss Marple asked. "Tall, dark coat, scarf over his face. Sounded like he was up to no good. I told the keeper to keep an eye out, but we haven't seen him since." Miss Marple thanked him and left, her suspicions deepening. The description matched the maid's story, and the pattern was becoming clearer. Someone from outside St. Mary Mead was involved, someone who knew the woods well enough to move unseen. But why the quarry, and what were they hiding? Over the next few days, the village grew more uneasy. Another sighting was reported, this time by Mr. Giles, the butcher, who swore he'd seen a man in a dark coat near the woods at dawn. The harvest festival was approaching, and the villagers were distracted, but Miss Marple sensed the tension. Beneath their preparations, she spent her days listening, observing, and piecing together the fragments. At the Blue Boar, she overheard a traveller mention a man asking about the quarry at the pub in Much Benham, the next village over. At the Women's Institute, she learned that Mrs. Weatherby's nephew, a clerk in London, had been asking about old mining records. On the eve of the festival, Miss Marple returned to the quarry, this time with Dolly, who insisted on coming along for a bit of adventure. The mist was thick, curling around the trees like ghostly fingers, and the quarry loomed ahead, its walls slick with damp. They moved quietly, guided by Miss Marple's flashlight. Near the same spot as before, they found fresh signs of digging deeper. This time, with a pile of earth hastily covered with leaves. "Look, Jane," Dolly whispered, pointing to a glint in the dirt. It was a pocket watch, its case dented but intact, engraved with the initials J.H. Miss Marple's heart quickened. "This changes things," she said softly. "This isn't just a hiding place, it's a grave." Dolly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A grave? Jane, you can't mean—" "I'm afraid so," Miss Marple said, her voice steady. "We must tell Inspector Slack, but quietly. We don't want to start a panic." They returned to the village, and Miss Marple sent a note to Inspector Slack, who arrived the next morning with his usual air of impatience. She showed him the watch and the digging site, careful to keep her tone matter-of-fact. Slack, though skeptical, agreed to investigate. By afternoon, his men had uncovered a shallow grave in the quarry, containing the body of a man in a dark coat. His face was unrecognizable, but the scarf and city clothes matched the descriptions. The village erupted in shock. Who was he? Why was he buried in the quarry? Miss Marple, sitting quietly at the festival, listened as the theories flew: murder, robbery, a feud gone wrong. She kept her own counsel, her mind working through the clues. The watch, with its initials, J.H., was the key. She recalled a name from Mrs. Weatherby's, Gossip James Harrow, her nephew. The clerk who'd been asking about mining records. She visited Mrs. Weatherby the next day, bringing a bouquet of late roses as a pretext. "I hear your nephew James has been in the area," she said casually. "Is he still here?" Mrs. Weatherby's face clouded. "No, he left a month ago. Said he had business in London." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Miss Marple said, her eyes soft but watchful. "He was interested in the quarry, wasn't he?" Mrs. Weatherby hesitated. "He did mention it's something about old mining claims. I didn't pay much mind. James is always chasing some scheme or other." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions growing. James Harrow, a clerk with an interest in the quarry, and now a body with his initials. She wrote in her diary that night, "The watch suggests James Harrow, but if he's the victim, who buried him, and why? The digging, the lights, the voices, someone else is involved, someone who knew what James was after." The next day, Inspector Slack confirmed the body was James Harrow, identified by papers in his pocket. He'd been struck on the head, likely with a blunt object, and buried in haste. The police questioned Mrs. Weatherby, who was distraught but had little to offer. Miss Marple, however, was far from satisfied. Harrow's interest in the quarry suggested he'd been searching for something worth killing for. She returned to the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her dig through old records. They found a map of the quarry, dated 1870, showing a vein of slate that had never been fully mined. Tucked into the file was a note about a rumored cache of stolen goods hidden during a robbery decades ago. The story was vague, but it mentioned a strongbox buried near the quarry's eastern wall. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A strongbox, could that be what Harrow was after? And had someone else wanted it badly enough to kill? She wrote, "The strongbox is the motive, I'm sure of it. Harrow found it, or came close, and someone stopped him. The lights, the digging, it was a search, and it's not over." She began to watch the woods more closely, enlisting Tommy Pierce to keep an eye out for lights or strangers. 2 nights later, he ran to her cottage, breathless. "Miss Marple, I saw them again, lights in the quarry, and to men this time. They were digging, same spot as before." Miss Marple thanked him and sent him home, then slipped out with her flashlight. The quarry was silent when she arrived, but the signs were clear: fresh earth, a discarded shovel, and a trail leading into the woods. She followed it cautiously, her heart pounding, until she reached a small clearing. There, hidden under a tarp, was a metal box, its lock broken but its contents intact. She didn't touch it, knowing better than to disturb evidence. Instead, she returned to the village and alerted Inspector Slack, who retrieved the box the next morning. Inside were gold coins, jewelry, and a ledger listing names, none local, but clearly tied to a long-ago theft. The strongbox was the prize. Harrow had sought, and someone else had killed to claim it. Miss Marple's next task was to identify the second man. She suspected a local, someone familiar with the woods and the quarry's history. She began to question the villagers subtly, focusing on those with ties to the Bantry estate, where the woods were closest. One name kept surfacing: Tom Blackwood, a gamekeeper who'd worked for Colonel Bantry for years. He was a quiet man, rarely seen in the village, but known for his knowledge of the woods. She visited the Bantry estate again, this time speaking to the head gamekeeper, Mr. Reed. "Tom's been odd lately," Reed admitted. "Staying out late, saying he's checking traps, but I've seen him near the quarry more than once." Miss Marple nodded, her plan forming. She needed to catch Blackwood in the act, but she couldn't do it alone. She enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry, explaining her suspicions. They agreed to help, though Dolly was nervous. "Jane, are you sure about this? What if he's dangerous?" "He may be," Miss Marple said, "but we'll be careful. That night, they set a trap." Colonel Bantry spread a rumour that the strongbox had been moved to the estate for safekeeping. Miss Marple, Dolly, and Reed hid near the quarry, watching. The path. At midnight, a figure emerged, Tom Blackwood, carrying a shovel and a lantern. He moved toward the quarry, unaware of the eyes on him. Miss Marple signalled Reed, who stepped forward with a lantern of his own. "Blackwood, stop where you are," he called. Blackwood froze, then bolted, but Colonel Bantry, waiting in the shadows, tackled him. Inspector Slack, alerted by Miss Marple, arrived moments later. Blackwood confessed under questioning. He'd known about the strongbox from old estate records and had partnered with Harrow to find it. When Harrow tried to cut him out, Blackwood killed him in a rage and buried the body. The village was stunned, but Miss Marple felt no surprise. She'd seen the pattern early, the whispers, the lights, the digging and pieced it together. She wrote in her diary, "The woods are quiet again, but for how long?" Blackwood's greed undid him, but St. Mary Mead holds more secrets. I'll be ready when they surface. The harvest festival went ahead, the village slowly settling back into its rhythm. Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting in her lap, her diary closed but never far from reach. The mystery was solved, but she knew another would come. It always did. Chapter 3. The ghost of Gossington Hall. The first frost of November had touched St. Mary Mead, tracing delicate patterns on the windows of its cottages and turning the lanes crisp underfoot. The village was settling into winter, with hearths aglow, and the promise of Christmas stirring quiet anticipation. But beneath the cosy surface, Miss Jane Marple sensed a current of disquiet, as subtle as the chill that seeped through her shawl. Her parlour, with its lace curtains and ticking clock, was her haven, but her mind was restless. The recent troubles at the vicarage and the woods had left the village on edge, and now a new shadow loomed, one that whispered of secrets older and darker than she had yet uncovered. Miss Marple opened her diary, its leather cover worn smooth by years of use, and began to write. November 3rd, 1928. Gossington Hall is the talk of the village again, though no one speaks openly. Dolly Bantry mentions strange happenings, their lights in empty rooms, footsteps where no one should be. The servants are frightened, and even Arthur seems uneasy. I suspect there's more to this than village superstition. Gossington Hall, the grand estate of Colonel and Mrs. Bantry, stood on the edge of St. Mary Mead, its sprawling grounds and Georgian facade a symbol of old wealth. Dolly Bantry, with her warm laugh and untidy charm, had always made the hall feel welcoming, but it had a history of odd occurrences. Miss Marple, who had known the Bantrys for years, remembered tales of a ghost from decades past, figure seen in the West Wing, blamed for broken china and misplaced jewels. She had dismissed those stories as fancy, but the new reports intrigued her. Ghosts, in her experience, were often a mask for human mischief. The next morning, Miss Marple called on Dolly, bringing a knitted scarf as a pretext. The hall's drawing room was as cheerful as ever, with a roaring fire and a tray of scones, but Dolly's eyes were shadowed. "Jane, I'm so glad you're here," she said, pouring tea. "Gossington's giving me the creeps lately. That maids are saying it's haunted again." "Haunted?" Miss Marple asked, her tone gently curious. "What have they seen?" Dolly shivered, though the room was warm. "Lights in the West Wing, where we never go. Footsteps at night. And last week, one of the maids, Seltzer, found a mirror in the old nursery cracked clean through. No one was near it." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind already sifting through possibilities. "And Arthur, what does he think?" "Oh, he says it's rats or drafts, but I caught him checking the locks twice last night. He's as rattled as I am." Miss Marple nodded, noting the details. Lights, footsteps, a broken mirror these were. Tangible, not spectral. Someone was moving through the hall, and they had a purpose. "May I see the West Wing?" she asked. "I've always admired the architecture." Dolly agreed, and they climbed the grand staircase to the West Wing, a maze of unused rooms draped in dust sheets. The air was cold, heavy with the musty scent of neglect. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning the floorboards and windows. In the nursery, she paused. The cracked mirror hung above a fireplace, its fracture radiating like a spiderweb. Nearby, the dust on the floor was disturbed, as if someone had stood there recently. She knelt, ignoring the creak of her knees, and found a faint smudge of boot polish. "This isn't a ghost," she said softly, more to herself than Dolly. "Someone's been here." Dolly's eyes widened. "You mean someone's sneaking around? But why? There's nothing here but old furniture." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "That's what we need to find out." Back in the village, Miss Marple began her quiet inquiries. At the Blue Boar Inn, she chatted with Mr. Petherick, the Bantry's butler, who admitted the staff was uneasy. "It's not just the lights, Miss Marple," he said, lowering his voice. "One of the footmen heard voices in the West Wing last week, 2 men arguing. He didn't dare investigate." Miss Marple thanked him, her suspicions deepening. Voices suggested more than one intruder, and an argument hinted at a shared secret. She visited Mrs. Price at the post office, knowing her knack for gossip. "I hear Gossington's got a ghost again," Miss Marple said. Adjusting her gloves, Mrs. Price leaned forward, eager to share. "Oh, it's dreadful, Miss Marple. Mrs. Weatherby says her cousin, who delivers coal to the hall, saw a man near the West Wing at dusk. Said he looked like a Stranger City type, in a long coat. A stranger in a long coat." The description echoed the figure from the woods. But Miss Marple doubted a connection. St. Mary Mead attracted its share of outsiders, each with their own motives. She tucked the detail away and continued her rounds, speaking with the milkman, the gardener, and even young Tommy Pierce, who'd seen a funny light flickering in the hall's upper windows. That evening, she wrote in her diary, "The West Wing is the key. Someone is searching for something, or hiding it. The boot polish, the voices, the stranger writ points to a plan, not a haunting. I must learn more about the hall's history and who might have a claim to it." The next day, Miss Marple visited the village library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records about Gossington Hall. They found a deed from 1850 listing a former owner, Sir Henry Clethering, who'd died under mysterious circumstances. A newspaper clipping mentioned a missing family heirloom sapphire brooch, rumoured to be hidden in the hall to keep it from creditors. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. A hidden jewel could explain the intrusions, especially if someone believed it was still there. She returned to Gossington and asked Dolly about the brooch. "Oh, that old story," Dolly said, laughing. "Arthur's great-uncle used to talk about it, but no one's ever found it. Why, do you think someone's after it?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said carefully. "Have any strangers visited recently? Tradesmen, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "Well, there was a man last month, said he was surveying the estate for the county. Arthur didn't like him too nosy, asking about the West Wing. We sent him packing." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A surveyor asking about the West Wing was no coincidence. She thanked Dolly and left, determined to dig deeper. That afternoon, she spoke with Mr. Giles, the butcher, who'd delivered meat to the hall. "I saw that surveyor chap," he said. "Tall, thin, with a sharp face. He was sketching the house, not just measuring land. Looked like he was casing the place." The description matched Mrs. Weatherby's cousin's account, and Miss Marple began to suspect the surveyor was no such thing. She wrote, "The surveyor is likely our intruder, or one of them. He's after the brooch, I'm sure of it. But who is he, and who's helping him? The voices suggest a partner, perhaps someone." Inside the hall, over the next few days, the disturbances at Gossington grew bolder. A window in the West Wing was found ajar, though the room was locked. Another maid, Sarah, reported hearing a scraping sound, like furniture being moved. Colonel Bantry, fed up, hired extra watchmen, but they saw nothing. Miss Marple, meanwhile, focused on the hall's staff, knowing an insider was likely involved. She chatted with Elsie, the maid who'd found the cracked mirror, and noticed her nervousness. "Have you seen anything else, Elsie?" Miss Marple asked gently. Elsie hesitated, twisting her apron. "Not seen, miss, but I heard someone in the West Wing last night. I was fetching linens, and there was a creak, like a door opening. I ran off before I saw who." Miss Marple patted her hand, but her mind was elsewhere. An insider, perhaps a servant, was helping the intruder. She began to watch the staff closely, noting their routines and habits. One name stood out, John Carter, a new footman who'd joined the household 2 months ago. He was quiet, efficient, but kept to himself. And Miss Marple noticed he often volunteered for night duties in the West Wing. She shared her suspicions with Dolly, who was sceptical. "John, he's such a nice lad, but I'll keep an eye on him, Jane." Miss Marple nodded, knowing she needed proof. She devised a plan to catch the intruders in the act. She suggested to Colonel Bantry that he spread a rumour. The brooch had been found in the West Wing and was locked in the study for safekeeping. The colonel, though dubious, agreed, and the rumour spread quickly through the village. That night, Miss Marple hid in the West Wing, tucked behind a heavy curtain in the nursery. Dolly and Mr. Petherick, the butler, were stationed nearby, armed with lanterns, The hall was silent, the only sound the distant tick of a clock. At midnight, a floorboard creaked. Miss Marple held her breath as two figures entered the room, their faces shadowed. One was tall and thin, matching the surveyor's description. The other was shorter, with the quick movements of John Carter. "Where's it hidden?" the tall man hissed, his voice low but urgent. "Study, like they said," Carter whispered. "But we need to be quick." They moved toward the door, but Miss Marple stepped forward, her flashlight blazing. "Gentlemen, I think you're mistaken," she said calmly. The men froze, startled. Dolly and Mr. Petherick appeared, blocking the exit. The tall man cursed and lunged for the window, but Colonel Bantry, waiting outside, tackled him. Carter, pale and trembling, surrendered without a fight. Inspector Slack arrived within the hour, and the men were taken into custody. The tall man was identified as Victor Slade, a known thief from London with a history of targeting country estates. Carter confessed to being his accomplice, lured by the promise of a share in the brooch's value. They'd learned of the sapphire from old records Slade had stolen, and Carter's position at Gossington gave them access to the West Wing. The village buzzed with the news, and Gossington Hall returned to its usual cheer. The brooch remained unfound, but Dolly declared she didn't care. "Let it stay lost," she said. "It's caused enough trouble." Miss Marple, back in her parlour, opened her diary one last time for this mystery. The ghost of Gossington was no ghost at all, just greed in human form. Slade and Carter underestimated St. Mary Mead, as so many do. The brooch may still be here, but some secrets are best left buried. Until the next one surfaces, I'll watch. She closed the diary and set her knitting aside. The village was quiet again, but she knew it wouldn't last. St. Mary Mead was a place of secrets, and her diary would be ready when the next one emerged. Chapter 4. The curse of the clock tower winter had tightened its grip on St. Mary Mead by mid-November, blanketing the village in a frost that glittered under the pale sun. The lanes were quiet, the cottages huddled against the cold, and the church clock tower loomed over the village square, its chimes marking the hours with solemn regularity. To most, it was a comforting sound, a reminder of the village's enduring rhythm. But to Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour window with her knitting, the chimes carried a faint note of discord. Something was stirring in St. Mary Mead, and the clock tower, an unlikely focal point, seemed to be at its heart. She opened her diary, its pages filled with the neat script of past mysteries, and wrote, November 17th, 1928, "The clock tower has become the subject of whispers. Mrs. Price says it stopped twice last week, though Mr. Archer swears he wound it properly. And yesterday, young Ellen Carter claimed she saw a figure atop the tower at midnight. The village calls it a curse, but I suspect a more human cause. The clock tower, part of St. Mary's Church, was a sturdy structure of weathered stone, its clock face a beacon for the village. It was maintained by Mr. Archer, the sexton, a meticulous man who took pride in its reliability. The recent malfunctions stopping for hours, then starting again without explanation, had sparked unease. Superstitious villagers spoke of a curse tied to the tower's history, a tale of a bell ringer who'd fallen to his death a century ago. Miss Marple, unimpressed by ghost stories, suspected someone was tampering with the mechanism, though why was unclear. The next morning, she bundled up against the cold and walked to the church, her breath visible in the crisp air. The square was busy with villagers preparing for the Christmas bazaar, their chatter mingling with the clatter of carts. Miss Marple paused by the tower, its iron door locked as always. She examined the ground nearby, noting scuff marks in the frost too deliberate to be casual. Someone had been here, and recently. She found Mr. Archer inside the church, polishing the brass candlesticks. "Good morning, Mr. Archer," she said, her tone pleasant. "The clock's been giving you trouble, I hear." He frowned, his hands pausing. Miss Marple, stopped twice. "No reason I can see. I checked the gears, the weights, everything's in order. It's queer, I'll tell you." "Has anyone been near the tower?" she asked, adjusting her scarf. "Someone unfamiliar, perhaps?" Mr. Archer hesitated. "Well, there was a lad. Poking around last week's, said he was studying architecture for a school project. Looked harmless, but I didn't like his manner. Too curious about the towers and sides." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. "What did he look like?" "Young, maybe 20, dark hair, city clothes. Had a notebook, scribbling away. I sent him off sharpish." Thanking him, Miss Marple made her way to the Blue Boar Inn, where gossip flowed as freely as tea. There, she overheard Mrs. Weatherby telling the barmaid about a stranger seen near the church at dusker, young man matching Mr. Archer's description, carrying a satchel. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her ears attuned to every word. A stranger, a stopped clock, and a figure on the tower. The pieces were scattered, but a pattern was forming. That evening, she wrote, "The clock tower is being used for something, or someone is using it to hide something. The stranger's interest suggests a purpose beyond mischief. I must learn who he is and what he wants." The next day, Miss Marple visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with her usual "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, "have you noticed any newcomers in the village? A young man, perhaps, asking about the church?" Mrs. Price's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. A Mr. Robert Lane, staying at the Blue Boar, said he's writing a book on old churches, but he's been asking odd questions about the tower, the crypt, even the old bellringer's tale." I thought it peculiar. Miss Marple thanked her, her suspicions deepening. A writer was a convenient cover, but Robert Lane's focus on the tower suggested more than scholarly interest. She decided to meet him, arranging a chance encounter at the inn under the guise of delivering a bizarre flyer. Lane was polite, with sharp features and a quick smile, but his eyes darted nervously when she mentioned the clock tower. "Just a fascinating structure," he said, stirring his coffee. "The history of these old towers, you know, full of stories." "Like the curse?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. "The village is quite stirred up about it." Lane laughed, but it was forced. "Superstition, nothing more. Clocks break down, no need for ghosts." Miss Marple smiled, letting the conversation drift, but she noted his unease. That night, she wrote, "Robert Lane is hiding something. His interest in the tower is too specific, and his manner betrays him. The stopped clock and the figure Ellen saw are connected to him, I'm sure." The following evening, the tower stopped. Again, its silence jarring the village. Miss Marple, unable to resist, slipped out with her flashlight, keeping to the shadows. The churchyard was empty, the tower looming dark against the starry sky. She circled it, her eyes catching a glint near the baser small key, half buried in the frost. It was too modern to belong to the church, its shape suggesting a lockbox or safe. She tucked it into her pocket, her heart quickening. The next morning, she shared her find with Dolly Bantry, who'd invited her to Gossington Hall for tea. "A key, Jane," Dolly said, peering at it. What's it for? Not the tower, surely? No, Miss Marple said, but I think it's tied to whoever's been tampering with it. Have you heard anything about Robert Lane? Dolly frowned. Arthur mentioned him. Said he saw him near the church last week, talking to a rough-looking man. Thought they were arguing. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. 2 men, one a stranger, the other unknown. The pattern was growing clearer, but the motive remained elusive. She spent the next few days listening and observing, piecing together fragments. At the Women's Institute, she learned that Lane had been seen sketching the tower's mechanism, claiming it was for his book. The milkman reported an odd delivery to the Blue Borer heavy crate, addressed to Lane, marked fragile. On the 4th night, the tower stopped again, and Ellen Carter, the baker's daughter, came to Miss Marple's cottage, breathless. Miss Marple, I saw him again up on the tower, just a shadow, but he was moving something. I swear it. Miss Marple calmed her, then wrote, Lane is using the tower, perhaps as a hiding place. The key, the crate, the stopped clocket suggests something valuable or dangerous. I must see the tower's interior. She persuaded Mr. Archer to let her inspect the clock mechanism, claiming an interest in its craftsmanship. The tower's interior was a narrow spiral of stone steps, leading to a platform where the clock's gears ticked ponderously. Mr. Archer pointed out the weights and pulleys, but Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to a corner where the dust was. Disturbed, hidden behind a beam was a small canvas bag, its contents heavy. She didn't touch it, but noted a faint chalk mark on the floor nearby a signal. Perhaps, that evening she wrote, the bag confirms it. Lane, or his accomplice, is hiding something in the tower. The key may fit a lockbox inside. I need to catch them in the act, but carefully. She devised a plan, enlisting Dolly and Colonel Bantry. She suggested they spread a rumor that the church was hiring a new bell ringer who'd inspect the tower daily. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched Lane closely at the inn. His composure slipped, his fingers tapping nervously. She knew he'd act soon. That night, she hid in the churchyard with Colonel Bantry, who'd reluctantly agreed to keep watch. At 1 a.m., a figure approached the tower lane, moving stealthily, a satchel over his shoulder. Another man joined him, shorter, with a limp. They unlocked the tower door and slipped inside. Miss Marple signaled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught Lane and his accomplice, a drifter named Harry Colon, the platform, retrieving the canvas bag. Inside was a lockbox containing stolen jewellery, part of a London heist months earlier. Lane confessed under questioning he'd used the tower to hide the loot, stopping the clock to signal Cole when it was safe to retrieve it. The curse was their cover, meant to scare off curious villagers. The village buzzed with the news, the curse debunked, but the thrill of scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, "The tower is silent again, its secrets exposed." Lane and Cole thought St. Mary Mead too sleepy to notice, but they were wrong. The village holds its own, and I'll be here when the next mystery calls. She closed her diary, the clock tower chiming midnight. St. Mary Mead was quiet, but she knew it was only a matter of time before another shadow stirred. Chapter 5. The riddle of the red cottage winter had settled firmly over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a frost that sparkled under the weak December sun. The lanes were hushed, the hedgerows bare, and the villagers huddled indoors, their hearths aglow with the promise of Christmas. Yet, beneath the festive preparations, A thread of unease wove through the chatter at the Blue Boar Inn and the post office. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her cosy parlour with her knitting needles clicking softly, felt it keenly as subtle disturbance, like a dropped stitch in an otherwise perfect pattern. Her diary, its leather cover worn smooth by years of secrets, waited on her desk for the next entry in what she sensed was a new mystery. She opened the diary, her pen steady despite the chill in her fingers, and wrote, December 2nd, 1928, the red cottage, long empty, is stirring whispers again. Mrs. Price says a light was seen in its windows last night, though no one lives there. Young Tommy Pierce claims he heard voices near the garden gate. The village speaks of ghosts, but I suspect a more earthly cause. The red cottage stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead, a small, ivy-clad house with a faded red door, abandoned since its last tenant, old Mrs. Harrow, passed away 3 years prior. Its garden was overgrown, its windows dark, but it had a reputation for odd occurrences, fleeting shadows, and now a mysterious light. Miss Marple, ever skeptical of the supernatural, suspected someone was using the cottage for their own purposes, and she intended to find out who. The next morning, she wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and set out for the cottage, her stout shoes crunching on the frosty path. The village was busy with Christmas preparations, wreaths on doors, children practicing carols, but the red cottage stood apart, its silence almost defiant. Miss Marple circled the property, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the garden gate, she found fresh footprints in the frost, too large for a child and too deliberate for a passer-by. They led to the back door, which was slightly ajar, its lock rusted but intact. She pushed the door open cautiously, the hinges creaking. Inside, the air was cold and musty, the furniture draped in dust sheets, but the dust on the floor was disturbed, and a faint smell of tobacco lingered. She moved to the parlour, where a single chair was uncovered, as if someone had sat there recently. On the windowsill, she found a cigarette stub, its brand unfamiliar, city-made, not local. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind already turning over possibilities. That afternoon, she visited Mrs. Price at the post office, knowing her gossip would be invaluable. Mrs. Price, Miss Marple said, adjusting her gloves, I hear there's been talk about the red cottage. A light in the window, wasn't it? Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed. Oh yes, Miss Marple. Mrs. Weatherby saw it herself last night, flickering like a candle. And Tommy Pierce says he heard voices, 2 men, arguing by the gate. It's eerie, I tell you. Some say it's Mrs. Harrow's ghost. Miss Marple smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. Have you seen anyone? Near the cottage? A stranger, perhaps? Well, now you mention it, a man was seen there last week, tall, in a dark overcoat, carrying a bag. Mr. Giles, the butcher, thought he was a tramp, but he didn't look like one. Too well dressed. Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar Inn, where the barmaid, Jenny, added another piece to the puzzle. I saw that man Mrs. Price mentioned, Jenny said, polishing a glass. He came in for a pint 2 nights ago, asked about the red cottage, said he was looking for a place to rent. Didn't give his name, though. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. A stranger asking about an abandoned cottage, footprints, a cigarette stub. This was no ghost story. That evening, she wrote, the red cottage is being used, likely, as a hiding place. The stranger's interest and the voices Tommy heard suggest a conspiracy. I must learn who this man is and what he's after. The next day, she called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping to glean more from her friend's network of servants. Dolly welcomed her with tea and scones, her drawing room warm against the winter chill. "Jane, you're up to something," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about the Red Cottage?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff mentioned anything odd? Visitors, perhaps, near the cottage?" Dolly frowned, thinking, "Now you mention it. One of the gardeners saw a man there last week, tall, dark coat, carrying a satchel. He was poking around the garden, but ran off when the gardener called out. Arthur thinks it's vagrants, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. The description matched Mrs. Price's, and the satchel suggested something worth carrying. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute meeting that afternoon, she listened as the gossip swelled. Sightings of the light, a broken window at the cottage, and a rumor that someone had been digging in the garden. She made a mental note to inspect the garden herself. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to the Red Cottage. Her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The garden was a tangle of weeds, but she found fresh earth near the rose bushes, as if someone had been digging. Kneeling carefully, she uncovered a small metal box. Its lock intact but scratched, as if someone had tried to force it open. She left it in place, knowing better than to disturb evidence, but noted its position. Back home, she wrote, "The box in the garden is the key. It's what the stranger is after, and the voices suggest he has an accomplice. The cigarette stub points to someone from outside St. Mary Mead. I must find out what's in that box and who knows about it." The next morning, she visited the church where Mr. Archer was sweeping the steps. "Mr. Archer," she said, "have you noticed anything near the Red Cottage? You pass it on your way home, don't you?" He nodded, leaning on his broom. "I, Miss Marple, saw a light there 2 nights ago and heard voices to men sounded like they were arguing. Couldn't make out the words, but it gave me a turn." Miss Marple thanked him, her suspicions growing. The voices, the digging, the box, it all pointed to a secret worth hiding. She decided to learn more about the stranger, starting with the Blue Boar. Jenny, the barmaid, confirmed he'd returned the previous night, calling himself Mr. Harris, and asking about local history, particularly Mrs. Harrow's family. Miss Marple's interest piqued. Mrs. Harrow had been a recluse, but rumors swirled about her past, a lost fortune, a scandalous affair, even a missing heir. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records. They found a will dated 1920, leaving the Red Cottage to Mrs. Harrow's nephew, a man named Edward Marsh, who'd never claimed it. A newspaper clipping mentioned Marsh as a gambler, last seen in London years ago. That evening, she wrote, "Edward Marsh may be our stranger or connected to him. The box could hold something he believes is his, fortune, perhaps, or proof of his claim. The accomplice complicates things. I must watch the cottage closely." Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Another window was broken, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing 2 men near the cottage at midnight, one carrying a shovel. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumor that the box had been found and moved to the church for safekeeping. The news spread like wildfire, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where Mr. Harris grew visibly agitated. That night, she hid near the cottage with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver just in case. At midnight, Two figures approached, the tall man in the dark coat and a shorter, stocky man with a limp. They moved to the rose bushes, digging frantically. Miss Marple signaled the colonel, who stepped forward, lantern blazing. "Stop right there," he called, his voice firm. The men froze, then bolted, but Inspector Slack, alerted by Miss Marple, was waiting with his men. The tall man was indeed Edward Marsh, and his accomplice was a London thug named Billy Tate, hired for muscle. The box, retrieved from the garden, contained letters proving Marsh's claim to a small fortune hidden by Mrs. Harrow, along with a map to a bank deposit in London. Marsh confessed under questioning. He'd learned of the fortune from old letters and had come to St. Mary Mead to retrieve it. Tate, impatient for his share, had pushed for faster action, leading to the break-ins and arguments. The village, predictably, buzzed with the scandal, but Miss Marple stayed silent, letting the gossip swirl. Back in her parlour, she wrote, "The Red Cottage holds no more secrets, for now." Marsh's greed led him to ruin, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead is never truly quiet. "I'll keep my eyes open for the next riddle." She closed her diary, the frost glittering outside. The village was calm, but she knew another mystery waited, just beyond the next turn of the season. Chapter 6. The Vanishing of Violet Lane. The winter of 1928 had deepened in St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a cold that seeped into bones and quieted the usual bustle. Snow dusted the rooftops, softening the edges of the cottages, and the villagers moved quickly through the lanes, their breath clouding in the frosty air. Christmas was a week away, and the village was alive with preparations, holly wreaths on doors, carols drifting from the church, and the scent of baking from every kitchen. But Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, felt a familiar prickle of unease. Beneath the festive cheer, something was amiss, and her sharp eyes had caught the first threads of a new mystery. She opened her diary, its pages a silent witness to the village's secrets, and wrote, December 10th, 1928. Violet Lane has not been seen since Sunday, and the village is beginning to whisper. Mrs. Price says she missed her shift at the post office, and Tommy Pierce claims he saw her walking toward the river path at dusk. No one speaks of foul play yet, but I fear there's more to this than a simple absence. Violet Lane was a young woman of 22, a clerk at the post office, known for her quiet demeanour and auburn hair. She lived alone in a small cottage near the river, a tidy place with geraniums in the window boxes. Her sudden disappearance had sparked concern, though most villagers assumed she'd gone to visit family in Much Benham. Miss Marple, however, doubted it. Violet was reliable, never missing work without notice, and her absence felt deliberate, as if someone had ensured she wouldn't be found. The next morning, Miss Marple bundled up against the cold and walked to Violet's cottage, her boots crunching on the snow-dusted path. The river glittered nearby, its banks icy and still. The cottage was locked, its curtains drawn, but Miss Marple circled the property, her eyes scanning for clues. Near the back door, she found footprints in the snow, 2 sets, one small and likely Violet's, the other larger, a man's boots, leading toward the river. The snow had blurred their edges, but they were recent, no more than a day old. She followed them to the riverbank, where they stopped abruptly, as if the walkers had vanished into the water. Her heart sank, but she kept her composure. The river was shallow here, too shallow for an accidental drowning, and there were no signs of a struggle. She returned to the cottage, noting a faint scratch on the back door's lock, as if someone had tried to pick it. Inside, through a gap in the curtains, she saw a teacup on the table, half full, and a shawl draped over a chair, signs of a life interrupted. Miss Marple made her way to the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with a worried frown. "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle, "when did you last see Violet?" Mrs. Price sighed, setting down a bundle of envelopes. "Sunday morning, Miss Marple." She was her usual self, quiet but cheerful. "Said she'd be in Monday, but she never showed." "It's not like her. Did she mention any visitors?" Miss Marple asked, adjusting her shawl. "Well, now you mention it. She did say a man came by her cottage Saturday night, a stranger, asking for directions to Much Benham. She thought it odd, him being there so late." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. A stranger, footprints, a picked lock list was no coincidence. She thanked Mrs. Price and moved on to the Blue Boar Inn, where gossip often revealed what propriety hid. There, Jenny, the barmaid, mentioned a man who'd stayed a few nights earlier. A tall fellow with a city accent who'd asked about Violet, claiming to be a cousin. "Didn't look like family to me," Jenny said, polishing a glass. "Too shifty." That evening, Miss Marple wrote, "Violet's disappearance is no accident. The footprints, the stranger, the teacup she was taken or left unwillingly. The man at her cottage is the key, but who is he and why Violet? I must learn more about her life and who might have reason to harm her." The next day, Miss Marple visited Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and a crackling fire, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Jane, you're sleuthing again, aren't you? What's this about Violet Lane?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just concerned, Dolly. Have your staff mentioned anything about Violet? Or a stranger near the river?" Dolly frowned, thinking. One of the maids, Sarah, said she saw a man by the river path last week, tall, in a dark coat, carrying a bag. She thought he was fishing, but it was too cold for that. "Arthur says it's probably a poacher, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. The description matched Jenny's, and the bag suggested something worth carrying. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swelled more sightings of the stranger. A broken gate near Violet's cottage, and a rumour that she'd been seen arguing with a man in Much Benham the previous week. Miss Marple made a mental note to visit Much Benham herself. That afternoon, she took the bus to the neighbouring village, where she spoke with Mrs. Carter, the baker's wife, who'd known Violet's family. "Violet was in Much Benham last Friday," Mrs. Carter said, dusting flour from her hands. "I saw her at the market, talking to a man, tall, dark hair, city clothes. Looked like they were arguing. She seemed upset when she left." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. "Did you hear what they were arguing about?" "Not clearly," Mrs. Carter said, "but something about money. Violet said, 'You can't make me,' and walked off." Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple wrote, "The man in Much Benham is likely our stranger. Violet knew him, and their argument suggests a debt or a secret. The footprints by the river worry me. Did she leave with him, or was she forced? I must find out who he is." Over the next few days, the village grew more anxious. Violet's absence was now openly discussed, and Inspector Slack, the brisk policeman, was called in. He questioned Violet's neighbours, but found little no signs of a struggle, no witnesses beyond Tommy's vague account. Miss Marple, however, was undeterred. She visited Violet's cottage again, this time with permission from Slack. who grudgingly respected her instincts. Inside, she found a letter tucked under a booker, single page, unsigned, in a sharp, slanted hand. "Meet me by the river, Sunday, 8 p.m. We need to settle this." The letter confirmed her fears. Violet had met someone, and it hadn't ended well. She showed the letter to Slack, who dismissed it as vague, but Miss Marple knew better. She began to watch the river path, enlisting Tommy Pierce to keep an eye out for strangers. 2 nights later, he ran to her cottage, breathless. "Miss Marple, I saw him, the man in the dark coat, near the river. He was carrying a bundle, looked heavy." Miss Marple thanked him, her heart pounding. She slipped out with her flashlight, keeping to the shadows. The riverbank was quiet, the snow soft and undisturbed. Near the spot where the footprints had ended, she found fresh Mark's boots again, and a drag mark, as if something heavy had been pulled through. The snow, her breath caught, but she saw no bundle, no sign of Violet. The trail led into the woods, then faded. She returned home and wrote, "The drag mark is ominous. Violet, or something of hers, was moved. The man is still here, or has an accomplice. I must act quickly before the trail goes cold." The next morning, she shared her findings with Inspector Slack, who organized a search of the woods. They found nothing, but Miss Marple's resolve hardened. She visited the Blue Boar again, where Jenny identified the stranger from a police sketch as Mr. Harris, the same man who'd asked about Violet. His real name, Slack later confirmed, was Charles Drake, a known gambler from London with a history of extortion. Miss Marple devised a plan. She spread a rumor through Dolly that Violet's diary had been found, containing proof of Drake's crimes. The news reached the Blue Boar, and that night Drake was seen leaving the inn in a hurry. Miss Marple, Colonel Bantry, and Slack followed him to the river, where he was digging near the drag mark. Slack arrested him on the spot. Under Hawkins found a bundle Violet's shawl, stained with blood. She'd been taken, beaten, and hidden in the riverbank. Drake confessed to kidnapping her, demanding money over a gambling debt. The village was stunned, but Miss Marple's quiet persistence had solved the riddle. She wrote, "Violet's shawl confirms it. The kidnapping was planned, and Drake knew where she was. I must find her, Jane." She closed her diary, the firelight glinting off the snow. "The village is safe now, Jane. Violet's safe." Chapter 7. The Echoes of Elm House. The winter of 1928 clung to St. Mary Mead like a heavy shawl, its frosty breath frosting the windows and quieting the lanes. The village was steeped in the final preparations for Christmas, with lanterns glowing. In the square and the scent of mulled wine drifting from the Blue Boar Inn, yet, beneath the festive hum, a shadow lingered, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, felt as keenly as a dropped stitch. Her diary, its leather cover, a silent guardian of secrets, waited on her desk for the next chapter in the village's unfolding tale. She opened it, her pen moving with quiet precision. December 17th, 1928, Elm House. Long shuttered, is stirring. Unease. Mrs. Weatherby claims she heard cries from its garden last night, and Tommy Pierce saw a lantern flickering behind its gates. The village whispers of old tragedies, but I suspect a living hand behind these echoes. Elm House stood at the northern edge of St. Mary Mead, a crumbling Victorian relic surrounded by overgrown elms. Its last owner, Mr. Reginald Thorne, had died. A decade ago, under mysterious circumstances, fall down the stairs, ruled an accident, but rumoured to be more. Since then, the house had stood empty, its windows boarded, its iron gates locked. The villagers avoided it, citing tales of ghostly cries and lights, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust such stories. Human motives, not spirits, drove the strange happenings in St. Mary Mead. The next morning, she wrapped herself in her warmest coat and set out for Elm House, her boots crunching on the icy path. The village was alive with Christmas cheer, children sledding, carolers practicing, but Elm House loomed apart, its gates rusted and forbidding. She examined the ground outside, finding fresh footprints in the snow, deep and deliberate, leading to a side gate that hung slightly ajar. The lock was scratched, as if forced, and a faint trail of mud led into the garden. Miss Marple slipped through the gate, her eyes scanning the overgrown lawn. The garden was a tangle of brambles, but a path had been recently trampled, leading to the house's back door. She didn't enter. Prudence outweighed curiosity, but noted a broken window pane, its edges jagged and fresh. Nearby, in the snow, lay a scrap of paper, crumpled and damp. She smoothed it out, a receipt from a London tobacconist, dated 3 days prior. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind already weaving possibilities. That afternoon, she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting Christmas cards with her usual fervour. "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, adjusting her scarf, "have you heard anything about Elm House? Strange noises, perhaps?" Mrs. Price's eyes widened. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful. Mrs. Weatherby heard cries last night, like someone in pain, coming from the garden. And Mr. Giles says he saw a man near the gates 2 nights ago, tall, in a long coat, carrying a lantern. It's that house, I tell you, cursed." Miss Marple smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. "A man, you say? Did Mr. Giles describe him? Tall, dark hair, city type. Looked out of place, he said. I reckon it's someone up to no good." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar, where Jenny, the barmaid, added another piece. "I saw a stranger here last week," Jenny said, wiping down the counter. "Tall, dark coat. Asked about Elm House, said he was researching old estates. Didn't give his name, but he paid with London money." That evening, Miss Marple wrote, "Elm House is no longer empty. The footprints, the receipt, the lantern, they point to an outsider with a purpose. The cries Mrs. Weatherby heard suggest someone in distress, or a ruse to keep people away. I must learn what draws this stranger to the house." The next day, she called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and a roaring fire, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Jane, you're sleuthing again, aren't you? What's this about Elm House?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious. Dolly, have your staff mentioned anything odd? A stranger near the house, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "One of the gardeners, Tom, said he saw a man by Elm House last week, tall, in a dark coat, carrying a satchel. He was poking around the gates, but ran off when Tom called out. Arthur thinks it's vandals, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A satchel suggested something worth carrying, documents, perhaps, or tools. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened. As the gossip swelled, more cries heard at night. A broken fence near Elm House, and a rumour that someone had been digging in the garden. She resolved to inspect the garden herself. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to Elm House, Her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The garden was silent, the snow undisturbed except for fresh footprints leading to a corner near the old well. There, the earth was disturbed, as if someone had been digging. She knelt, ignoring the cold, and found a small metal tin, its lid scratched but unopened. She left it in place, knowing better than to disturb evidence, but noted a faint smell of oil, as if the tin had been recently handled. Back home, she wrote, the tin in the garden is the key. It's what the stranger is after or hiding. The cries, the lantern, the digging, it's all connected. I must find out who this man is and what he seeks. The next morning, she visited the church where Mr. Archer was polishing the pews. Mr. Archer, she said, you pass Elm House on your way home, don't you? Have you noticed anything unusual? He nodded, setting down his cloth. I, Miss Marple, heard cries 2 nights ago, coming from the garden. Thought it was a fox at first, but it sounded human. And I saw a light in the house upstairs, in the old nursery. Miss Marple thanked him, her suspicions deepening. Cries and a light in the nursery suggested someone was inside, possibly held against their will. She decided to learn more about Elm House's history, visiting the library where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records. They found a deed from 1910 listing Reginald Thorne's heirs, a daughter, Emily, who'd vanished after his death, and a nephew, Henry Thorne, last seen in London. A newspaper clipping mentioned a family dispute over a hidden inheritance, rumoured to be jewels or bonds stashed in the house. That evening, she wrote, the tin may hold Thorne's inheritance, or proof of it. The stranger could be Henry, or someone he hired. The cries worry me, someone is in danger, or being used to draw attention. I must watch the house closely. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Another window was smashed, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing 2 men near Elm House at midnight, one carrying a shovel. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumour that the tin had been found and moved to the church for safekeeping. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where the stranger, calling himself Mr. Ellis, grew visibly agitated. That night, she hid near Elm House with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At 1 a.m., 2 figures approach, the tall man in the dark coat and a shorter, wiry man with a scarf. They moved to the well, digging frantically. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who stepped forward, lantern blazing. Stop right there, he called, his voice firm. The men froze, then bolted, but Inspector Slack, alerted by Miss Marple, was waiting with his men. The tall man was Henry Thorne, and his accomplice was a hired thug named Jack Riley. The tin, retrieved from the garden, contained bonds and a will proving Henry's claim to the Thorne fortune. Henry confessed he'd learned of the inheritance and hired Riley to help find it, staging the cries to scare off villagers. The cries, they admitted, came from a phonograph hidden in the nursery, a trick to fuel the ghost story. The village buzzed with the news, the curse debunked, but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, Elm House is quiet again, its echoes silenced. Henry's greed undid him, as it often does, but St. Mary Mead holds more secrets, and I'll be ready when they surface. She closed her diary, the snow falling softly outside. The village was calm, but she knew another mystery waited, just beyond the next frost. Chapter 8. The Phantom of the Frost. The winter of 1928 had woven a crystalline veil over St. Mary Mead, with snow blanketing the village in a hush that softened every sound. The days before Christmas were filled with the glow of lanterns, the jingle of bells, and the laughter of children building snowmen in the square. Yet, beneath this festive warmth, a chill of another kind stirred, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, sensed with her usual clarity. Her diary, its pages a quiet repository of the village's secrets, lay open on her desk, ready to capture the next mystery that had begun to unfold. She dipped her pen and wrote, December 20th, 1928. The old mill by the river is the talk of the village. Mrs. Price says a figure was seen there at midnight, cloaked and silent, and young Ellen Carter heard a strange hum from its ruins. The villagers call it a phantom, but I suspect a more earthly presence. The old mill, a derelict structure on the riverbank, had stood unused for decades, its wheel long stilled and its stones crumbling under ivy. It was a place of childhood dares and whispered tales, said to be haunted by a miller who drowned in the river a century ago. Recent reports of a cloaked figure and odd noises had revived the stories, but Miss Marple, unmoved by superstition, knew such tales often cloaked human schemes. She resolved to investigate, her curiosity sharper than the winter air the next morning. She bundled up against the biting cold and walked to the mill, her boots sinking into the snow. The village was alive with Christmas preparations wreaths on doors, carols drifting from the church, but the mill stood apart, its silhouette stark against the frozen river. She approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the snow for signs of passage. Near the mill's entrance, she found footprints deep, uneven, as if someone had lingered. They led to a side door, its lock broken, and a faint trail of ash dusted the threshold, suggesting a recent fire or cigarette. Miss Marple slipped. Inside, the air damp and heavy with the scent of mould. The mill's interior was a maze of rusted machinery and splintered beams, but the dust on the floor was disturbed, as if someone had moved through recently. In a corner, she found a pile of straw, flattened as if used for a bed, and a scrap of cloth coarse, dark wool, torn from a cloak. Nearby lay a metal tool, a small crowbar, its edge scratched. She tucked the cloth and crowbar into her basket, her mind already sifting through possibilities. That afternoon, she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting Christmas parcels with her usual zeal. Mrs. Price, Miss Marple said, adjusting her scarf, I hear there's been talk about the old mill. A figure seen at night, wasn't it? Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice dropping. Oh, Miss Marple, it's chilling. Ellen Carter heard a hum last night, like machinery coming from the mill. And Mr. Giles saw a cloaked man there 2 nights ago, moving like a shadow. It's the phantom, I tell you. Miss Marple smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. A cloaked man, you say? Did Mr. Giles describe him? Tall, hunched, face hidden. He carried a lantern, but it flickered out when Giles called to him. Gives me shivers, just thinking about it. Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar Inn, where Jenny the barmaid added another piece. I saw a stranger here 3 nights ago, Jenny said, polishing a glass. Tall, wore a dark cloak, kept his face low. Asked about the mill, said he was studying old buildings. Paid with city coins, not local. That evening, Miss Marple wrote, the mill is hiding someone. Or something. The footprints, the straw, the crowbar, they point to an outsider with a purpose. The hum Ellen heard suggests activity, not ghosts. I must learn who this stranger is and what he seeks. The next day, she called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and mince pies, her drawing room warm against the snow outside. "Jane, you're up to something," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about?" "The old mill." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff mentioned anything odd? A stranger near the river, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "One of the gamekeepers, Tom, saw a man by the mill last week, tall, cloaked, carrying a sack. He was poking around the ruins, but vanished when Tom approached. Arthur thinks it's poachers, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A sack suggested something worth hiding tools, perhaps, or stolen goods. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened. As the gossip swirled more sightings of the cloaked figure, a broken window at the mill, and a rumor that someone had been digging near the riverbank. She resolved to inspect the mill again. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to the mill, her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The river was frozen, its surface glinting under the moon. Near the mill's foundation, she found fresh earth, disturbed as if someone had been digging. Kneeling carefully, she uncovered a small canvas bag, its contents heavy. She didn't open it, knowing better than to disturb evidence, but noted a faint smell of oil, as if the bag held machinery parts or chemicals. "Back home," she wrote, "the bag in the mill is the key. It's what the stranger is protecting or seeking. The hum, the cloak, the digging, it's all connected. I must find out what's in that bag and who this man is." The next morning, she visited the church, where Mr. Archer was sweeping the steps. "Mr. Archer," she said, "you pass the mill on your way home, don't you? Have you noticed anything unusual?" He nodded, leaning on his broom. "I, Miss Marple, heard that hum 3 nights ago, like gears turning. Thought it was the wind at first, but it came from the mill, and I saw a light inside flickering, like a lantern." Miss Marple thanked him, her suspicions deepening. A hum and a light suggested someone was working inside the mill, perhaps at night to avoid notice. She decided to learn more about the stranger, starting with the blue boar. Jenny confirmed the cloaked man had returned, calling himself Mr. Gray and asking about the mill's history, particularly its machinery. Miss Marple's interest piqued. The mill's machinery, though rusted, could still function with effort, and the hum suggested it had been used recently. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records about the mill. They found a blueprint from 1850 showing a hidden chamber beneath the mill, used for storing grain ore, as a newspaper clipping hinted, smuggled goods during the Napoleonic Wars. The clipping also mentioned a lost cache of silver, rumored to be hidden in the chamber after a botched smuggling run. That evening, she wrote, "The hidden chamber is the motive, I'm sure. The stranger seeks the silver, or believes it's there. The hum suggests he's trying to access it, perhaps by restarting the mill's gears. I must watch the mill closely." Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Another window was smashed, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing 2 men near the mill at midnight, one cloaked, the other shorter, carrying a shovel. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumor that the mill's chamber had been found and its contents moved to the church for safekeeping. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the blue boar, where Mr. Gray grew visibly agitated. That night, she hid near the mill with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, 2 figures, a cloaked man and a shorter, stocky man with a scarf. They entered the mill, their lantern casting shadows. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught the men inside, working the mill's gears with a makeshift crank. The cloaked man was identified as Victor Hale, a London thief with a history of hunting lost treasures. His accomplice was a local drifter, Sam Cobb, hired for his knowledge of the river. The canvas bag contained tools and dynamite meant to blast open the chamber. Hale confessed he'd learned of the silver from old smuggling records and used the mill to search for it, staging the Phantom to scare off villagers. The village buzzed with the news. The Phantom debunked, but the scandal alive. Miss Marple back in her parlour wrote, "The mill is silent again, its echo stilled. Hale's greed led him to ruin, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more secrets, and I'll be here when they surface." She closed her diary, the snow falling softly outside. The village was calm, but she knew another mystery waited, just beyond the next frost. Chapter 9. The secret of the snowbound train. The winter of 1928 had reached its iciest peak in St. Mary Mead, with snow piling high against cottage walls and turning the lanes into glassy paths. The village was a picture of Christmas Eve serenity, with lanterns glowing in windows and the church choir's carols drifting through the frosty air. Yet, beneath this tranquil facade, a new mystery was stirring, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, sensed with her usual acuity. Her diary, its leather cover bearing the weight of countless secrets, lay open on her desk, ready to record the latest enigma that had rolled into the village with the evening train. She dipped her pen and wrote, December 24th, 1928. The 6:15 train from London stopped unexpectedly near the village station last night. Stranded by snow, Mrs. Price says a passenger was seen fleeing into the woods, and Tommy Pierce heard shouts from the carriage. The villagers speak of a robbery, but I suspect a deeper secret. The St. Mary Mead station, a modest platform on the edge of the village, served the branch line to London. Last night's train, delayed by a blizzard, had ground to a halt just beyond the station, its passengers forced to wait hours until the tracks were cleared. By morning, the train had moved on, but rumours swirled of a missing passenger, a locked compartment, and a satchel left behind. Miss Marple, ever alert to the unusual, knew such incidents were rarely as simple as they seemed. The next morning, Christmas Day, she wrapped herself in her warmest coat and walked to the station, her boots crunching through the snow. The village was quiet, most families gathered indoors, but the station was a hive of gossip. She found Mr. Hawkins, the station master, sweeping snow from the platform, his face creased with worry. "Good morning, Mr. Hawkins," Miss Marple said, her tone pleasant. "Quite a night with the train, I hear." He nodded, leaning on his broom. "Aye, Miss Marple. Snow blocked the tracks, and the 6:15 was stuck till midnight. Then there's the business with the passenger gone, they say, without a trace." Miss Marple adjusted her scarf, her eyes soft but keen. "Gone. Did anyone see him?" "Tommy Pierce was here, helping with lanterns. Said he saw a man jump from the train, cloaked, running toward the woods, and there was shouting from one of the compartments, sounded like an argument." Miss Marple thanked him and examined the platform, noting churned snow near the tracks, as if someone had indeed leaped off. A glint caught her azure brass button, half buried. its edge engraved with a crest she didn't recognize. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind already sifting possibilities. That afternoon, she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting late Christmas cards with her usual fervor. "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, "I hear there's talk about the train. A passenger missing, wasn't it?" Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's a proper mystery. Mrs. Weatherby says the man was carrying a satchel, heavy, by the look of it, and Jenny at the Blue Boar heard from a porter that a compartment was locked tight with blood on the window." Miss Marple smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. "Blood, you say? Did anyone describe the man? Tall, cloaked, face hidden." "The porter thought he was a city gent, but he didn't give his name. Vanished into the woods, they say." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar, where Jenny, the barmaid, added another piece. "I heard from a passenger who stayed here last night," Jenny said, wiping down the counter. "Said the man was arguing with someone in the compartment loud, like they were fighting over money. Then the train stopped and he was gone. That evening," Miss Marple wrote, "the missing passenger is no mere runaway. The button, the satchel, the blood, they point to a crime, perhaps robbery or worse. The woods are the key, but what was he carrying, and who was with him?" The next day, Boxing Day, Miss Marple called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and leftover Christmas cake, her drawing room cozy against the snow. "Jane, you're sleuthing again," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about the train?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff mentioned anything odd? A stranger in the woods, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "One of the gamekeepers, Tom, saw a man near the woods last night, tall, cloaked, carrying a satchel. He was moving fast, like he didn't want to be seen. Arthur thinks it's a poacher, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A satchel suggested something valuable, money, jewels, or documents. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swelled more sightings of the cloaked man, a broken fence near the woods, and a rumor that the satchel had been found empty by the river. She resolved to search the woods herself that evening. Under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped into the woods near the station, her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The snow was deep, but a path had been trampled, leading to a clearing by the river. There, half hidden under a bush, she found the satchel, leather, well made, but empty except for a torn envelope with a London postmark. She left it in place, noting a faint smell of tobacco, as if the man had smoked while hiding. Back home, she wrote, "The satchel confirms a crime. It was valuable enough to fight over, but now it's empty. The button and envelope point to a city. Connection, I must find out who the passenger was and what he carried." The next morning, she visited the station, where Mr. Hawkins let her examine the train's passenger log, kept for emergencies. The 6:15 had carried a Mr. Arthur Vance, booked for a first-class compartment. No other details were recorded, but a porter recalled Vance as tall, cloaked, and nervous, clutching a satchel. Miss Marple thanked Hawkins and moved on to the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old newspapers. They found a report from London about a recent bank theft, bonds and cash, carried in a leather satchel, stolen by a man matching Vance's description. That evening, she wrote, "Arthur Vance is our man, likely the thief. The satchel held stolen. bonds, and someone on the train knew it. The blood and shouts suggest a struggle, but where is Vance now? Over the next few days, the village grew uneasy. Another sighting of the cloaked man was reported, this time near the churchyard, and Tommy Pierce found a blood-stained scarf in the woods. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumour that the satchel's contents had been found and locked in the church safe. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where a new stranger, a short, wiry man calling himself Mr. Clark, grew agitated. That night, she hid near the church with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, two figures approached the cloaked man, limping now, and the wiry Mr. Clark. They tried the church door, whispering urgently. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught the men inside. Searching the vestry, the cloaked man was Arthur Vance, wounded from a struggle on the train. Mr. Clark was his accomplice, a London fence named Harry Lyle. The satchel's bonds had been stolen by Lyle during the train stop, leaving Vance to flee in panic. The blood came from a knife fight between them, and Vance had hidden in the woods, hoping to reclaim his share. The village buzzed with the news, the phantom debunked but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, "The train's secret is out, its echoes silenced. Vance's greed undid him, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more mysteries, and I'll be here when they surface." She closed her diary, the snow falling softly outside. The village was calm, but she knew another puzzle waited, just beyond the next snowflake. Chapter 10. The Whisper of the Winter Fair. The winter of 1928 had settled into St. Mary Mead with a quiet ferocity, the snow piling high against cottage walls and transforming the village into a glistening tableau of Christmas cheer. The annual Winter Fair, held in the village square, was in full swing, with stalls laden with mince pies, holly wreaths, and hand-knitted scarves. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the frosty cobblestones, and the laughter of children mingled with the strains of a fiddler's tune. Yet beneath this festive veneer, Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour window with her knitting, sensed a shadow moving through the merriment. Her diary, its leather cover, a silent keeper of the village's secrets, lay open on her desk, ready to capture the next mystery that had begun to unfold. She dipped her pen and wrote, December 27th, 1928. The winter fair has brought an undercurrent of unease. Mrs. Price whispers of a stranger seen lurking near the stalls, and young Tommy Pierce claims a valuable brooch vanished from Mrs. Weatherby's booth. The village speaks of pickpockets, but I suspect a deeper purpose. The winter fair was St. Mary Mead's pride, a tradition that drew villagers and outsiders alike to trade goods, share stories, and revel in the season's warmth. But this year, small incidents had marred the festivities. A missing brooch, a torn shawl found near the church, and fleeting glimpses of a stranger who seemed to vanish into the snow. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the village's pulse, knew these were not random acts. Someone was using the fair's bustle to mask their intentions, and she intended to find out who. The next morning, she wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and walked to the square, her boots crunching through the snow. The fair was in full swing, with vendors calling out their wares and children darting between stalls. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning the crowd. Near Mrs. Weatherby's booth, where handmade jewellery was displayed, she noticed scuff, marks in the snow, as if someone had lingered too long. A glint caught her Arger silver hairpin, half buried, its design too fine for a villager's trinket. She tucked it into her basket, her mind already weaving possibilities. She approached Mrs. Weatherby, who was rearranging her stall with a worried frown. "Good morning, Mrs. Weatherby," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "I hear you lost a brooch yesterday. Quite a shame." Mrs. Weatherby sighed, her hands fluttering. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's dreadful. A sapphire brooch, family heirloom, gone in broad daylight. I turned away for a moment, and it vanished. I blamed that stranger tall in a grey coat, hovering near the stall." Miss Marple nodded, adjusting her scarf. "Did you see his face?" "Not clearly, but he had a city look, sharp eyes, dark hair. He was gone before I could call out." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar Inn, where the fair's visitors often gathered. Jenny the barmaid was busy serving mulled wine, but she paused to share what she'd heard. "I saw that man Mrs. Weatherby mentioned," Jenny said, wiping her hands. "Came in last night, asked about the fair's schedule, especially the jewelry stalls. Called himself Mr. Stone, but he didn't look like a stone to meet too shifty." That evening, Miss Marple wrote, "The missing brooch is no simple theft. The hairpin, the stranger, the timing it points to a calculated act. Mr. Stone, if that's his name, is after something specific, and the fair is his cover. I must learn more about him and his purpose the next day." She called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and a roaring fire, her drawing room festive with holly. "Garlands, Jane, you're sleuthing again," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about the fair?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff noticed any strangers at the fair? Someone near the stalls, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "One of the maids, Sarah, said she saw a man by Mrs. Weatherby's booth door, grey coat, carrying a small bag. He was watching the crowd, like he was waiting for something. Arthur thinks it's pickpockets, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Weatherby's. A bag suggested something worth stealing or hiding. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swirled another theft, this time a silver locket from Mrs. Price's stall, and a torn glove found near the church. She resolved to inspect the fairground herself. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to the square. Her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The fair was winding down, but a few stalls remained open, their lanterns casting long shadows. Near Mrs. Price's booth, she found fresh footprints in the snow, leading to a narrow alley behind the church. There, tucked under a crate, was a small leather pouch, empty but smelling faintly of lavender, as if it had held something delicate. She left it in place, noting a faint scratch on the crate, as if it had been moved recently. "Back home," she wrote, "the pouch is a clue, perhaps, linked to the brooch and locket. The stranger is targeting valuables, but why leave the pouch empty? The footprints and gloves suggest he's not alone. I must find out who Mr. Stone is and what he seeks." The next morning, she visited the church, where Mr. Archer was setting up chairs for the Christmas service. "Mr. Archer," she said, "you're near the fair most days, aren't you? Have you noticed anything odd?" He nodded, setting down a chair. "I, Miss Marple, saw a man 2 nights ago, near the stall, grey coat, face half hidden. Heard him talking to someone, low voices, sounded like they were planning something. Gave me a queer feeling." Miss Marple thanked him, her suspicions deepening. To men, planning in secret suggested a conspiracy. She decided to learn more about Mr. Stone. Starting with the Blue Boar, Jenny confirmed he'd returned, asking about local jewelers and mentioning a buyer in London. Miss Marple's interest peaked. The thefts were not random, they were targeted, likely for resale. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records about the fair. They found a report from 1910, mentioning a string of thefts during a previous fair, linked to a London gang who used the event as cover to steal heirlooms. The gang's leader, a man named Victor Crane, had never been caught. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Could Mr. Stone be Crane, or someone working for him? That evening, she wrote, "The thefts mirror the 1910 crimes, suggesting a pattern. Mr. Stone may be Victor Crane, or his agent, targeting heirlooms for a London buyer. The accomplice complicates things. Must identify him." Over the next few days, the fair grew quieter, but the thefts continued. A gold ring from Mr. Giles's stall, a pearl brooch from Mrs. Carter. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumor that a valuable necklace, donated for the church raffle, had been found with a hidden inscription linking it to the thefts. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where Mr. Stone grew, visibly nervous. That night, she hid near the church with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, two figures approached the stalls, the tall man in the grey coat and a shorter, wiry man with a scarf. They rummaged through Mrs. Weatherby's booth, searching for the necklace. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught the men in the act. The tall man identified as Victor Crane, the London thief, and his accomplice as a local petty criminal, Jim Holt, hired for his knowledge of the village. A hidden cache in Holt's cart revealed the stolen brooch, locket, and other items bound for a London fence. Crane confessed he'd used the fair's chaos to steal heirlooms, planning to sell them to a wealthy collector. The village buzzed with the news, the phantom thief exposed, but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, "The fair is safe again, its whispers silenced. Crane's greed undid him, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more secrets, and I'll be ready when they surface." She closed her diary, the snow falling softly outside. The village was calm, but she knew another mystery waited, just beyond the next lantern's glow. Chapter 11. The Enigma of the Frosted Letter. The winter of 1928 had tightened its hold on St. Mary Mead, blanketing the village in a deep snow that muffled every sound and turned the lanes into shimmering paths. The new year was approaching, and the villagers were busy with post-Christmas tidying, their cottages aglow with the last embers of festive cheer. Yet, beneath this quiet contentment, a new mystery was stirring, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, sensed with her usual clarity. Her diary, its leather cover worn by years of secrets, lay open on her desk, ready to capture the latest puzzle that had arrived with a single frost-covered letter. She dipped her pen and wrote, December 30th, 1928. A letter was delivered to the vicarage this morning, anonymous and sealed with red wax, its contents causing a stir. Mrs. Price says it hinted at a scandal, and Griselda is shaken. The village whispers of blackmail, but I suspect a deeper truth. The vicarage, home to Reverend Leonard Clement and his lively wife Griselda, was a familiar nexus of trouble in St. Mary Mead. The letter, slipped under the door at dawn, had set. Tongues wagging. Griselda had shared its contents with Mrs. Price, who'd spread the news. It was a cryptic note, typed on fine paper, warning of a secret buried in the village that would ruin the vicar's reputation if not addressed. Miss Marple, ever sceptical of melodrama, knew such letters were rarely idle threats. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and she intended to uncover their purpose the next morning. She wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and walked to the vicarage, her boots crunching through the snow. The village was quiet, the fair stalls cleared away, but the air hummed with gossip. She found Griselda in the drawing room, pale and fidgeting with her teacup. "Jane, I'm so glad you're here," Griselda said, her voice tight. "This letter, it's awful. Leonard says it's nonsense, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her eyes soft but alert. "May I see it, my dear?" Griselda handed her the letter, its paper crisp despite the frost that had clung to it. Typed in neat lines, it read, "The truth lies buried in St. Mary Mead, Reverend. Pay £500 by New Year's Eve, or your shame will be known to all. Leave the money in the hollow oak by the river at midnight." No signature, just a red wax seal, its design smudged but faintly floral. Miss Marple studied it, noting the quality of the paper to fine for local stock and the seal's oddity. "Have you shown this to the police?" she asked. Griselda shook her head. "Leonard won't hear of it. Says it's a prank, but I'm frightened, Jane. What if it's true?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. "Keep it safe, my dear, and don't speak of it yet. I'll look into it." She left the vicarage and examined the hollow. Oak by the river, a gnarled tree known to village children as a hiding spot. The snow around it was undisturbed, but she found a faint scrape on the bark, as if someone had checked the hollow recently. Nearby, half buried in the snow, lay a cigarette stub, its brand foreign London made, not local. She tucked it into her pocket, her suspicions deepening. That afternoon she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with her usual zeal. "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, adjusting her gloves, "I hear about the letter at the vicarage. Have you noticed any strangers in the village? Someone posting unusual mail, perhaps?" Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice low. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's all anyone's talking about. I saw a man yesterday dropping a letter in the box stall, in a dark overcoat, face half hidden by a scarf. Looked like a city gent, not local. And the letter was sealed with red wax, same as the vicar's." Miss Marple nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Did he say anything?" "Not a word, but he was in a hurry. Mr. Giles saw him too, near the river, carrying a satchel. Said he looked nervous." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar Inn, where Jenny, the barmaid, added another piece. "I saw that man Mrs. Price mentioned," Jenny said, polishing a glass. "Came in 2 nights ago, called himself Mr. Baxter, asked about the vicarage, said he was writing a book on village history. Didn't believe him too shifty. That evening, Miss Marple wrote, 'The letter is blackmail, no doubt, but its purpose is unclear. The cigarette stub and red wax point to an outsider, likely Mr. Baxter. The hollow oak suggests a plan, but what secret does he know? I must learn more about the vicar's past.' The next day, she called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and mince pies, her drawing room festive with holly. "Jane, you're sleuthing again," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about the vicarage letter?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff noticed any strangers near the river? Someone with a satchel, perhaps? Dolly frowned, thinking. One of the gardeners, Tom, saw a man by the river 2 nights ago, tall, dark coat, carrying a satchel. He was poking around the hollow oak, but ran off when Tom called out. Arthur thinks it's a poacher, but I'm not so sure. Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A satchel suggested. Documents or tools, perhaps evidence for the blackmail. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swirled another letter had arrived at the vicarage, this time demanding £600, and a villager reported seeing a cloaked figure near the church at dusk. She resolved to inspect the hollow oak again. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped to the river. Her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The snow around the oak was now trampled, and inside the hollow, she found a small note, typed like the first, increased to £600. Midnight, New Year's Eve, no tricks. The paper matched the vicar's letter, and the wax seal bore the same floral design. Clearer now arose, not local. Back home, she wrote. The second letter confirms blackmail, and the rose seal is a clue, perhaps, a family crest. Mr. Baxter knows something about Leonard, something worth £600. I must uncover the vicar's secret before the deadline. The next morning, she visited the vicarage again, finding Leonard in his study, his face drawn. Jane, he said, his voice low, Griselda told you about the letters, didn't she? I don't know what to do. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her tone gentle. Leonard, is there anything in your past that someone might use against you? An old debt, perhaps, or a misunderstanding? He hesitated, his hands trembling. There was an incident years ago, before I came here. A woman in London, she claimed I wronged her, but it was a lie. I thought it was forgotten. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. And her name? Clara Rose, he said, his voice barely audible. She disappeared after I left London. The name struck a chord, the rose seal. Miss Marple thanked him and left, her mind racing. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old London newspapers. They found a 1915 report about Clara Rose, a seamstress who'd accused a young clergyman of misconduct, then vanished after a public dispute. The clergyman wasn't named, but the timing fit Leonard's past. That evening, she wrote, Clara Rose is the key. The blackmailer knows Leonard's connection to her and is using it. The rose seal suggests a relative, perhaps seeking revenge or profit. I must find Mr. Baxter before New Year's Eve. Over the next 2 days, the village grew tense. A third letter arrived, demanding £700, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing the cloaked man near the river again, carrying a lantern. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumour that the vicar had confessed to the police, naming his blackmailer. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where Mr. Baxter grew visibly agitated. That night, New Year's Eve, she hid near the hollow oak with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, 2 figures approached the tall man in the dark coat and a shorter, wiry man with a scarf. They checked the hollow, finding no money, and began to argue. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught the men in the act. The tall man was Edward Rose, Clara's brother, and his accomplice, was a London thug named Tom Vance, hired for intimidation. Edward confessed he'd found Clara's old letters accusing Leonard and saw a chance for profit. The wax seal was his family's crest, used to taunt the vicar. Clara, he admitted, had died years ago, her accusations unfounded. The village buzzed with the news, the blackmail plot exposed but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, "The vicarage is safe again, its secrets laid bare." Edward's greed undid him, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more mysteries, and I'll be ready when they surface. She closed her diary, the snow falling softly outside. The village was calm, but she knew another puzzle waited just beyond the next frost. Chapter 12. The shadow on the snow, the winter of 1928, had reached its deepest chill in St. Mary Mead, with snowdrifts piling high against the cottages and a biting wind rattling the windows. The village, now past the new year, was settling into the quiet rhythm of January, with only the occasional clink of shovels clearing paths to break the silence. Yet, beneath this frosty calm, a new disturbance was brewing, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, felt with her usual keen instinct. Her diary, its leather cover etched with the weight of countless mysteries, lay open on her desk, ready to record the latest enigma that had crept into the village with the snow. She dipped her pen and wrote, January 3rd, 1929. A shadow was seen on the hill near Meadow Farm last night, fleeting but unmistakable. Mrs. Price says it vanished into the barn, and Tommy Pierce heard a strange clatter from within. The village whispers of a prowler, but I suspect a more deliberate purpose. Meadow Farm, owned by the kindly but reclusive Mr. and Mrs. Hargreaves, stood on a hill overlooking St. Mary Mead, its barn a weathered structure used for storing hay and tools. Recent reports of a shadowy figure and odd noises had stirred unease, with villagers recalling old tales of smugglers hiding in the barn during the war years. Miss Marple, unimpressed by such stories, knew that shadows and sounds often masked human schemes, and she resolved to uncover the truth. The next morning, she wrapped herself in her warmest coat and set out for Meadow Farm, her boots sinking into the snow. The village was hushed, with most residents indoors, but the hill path was well trodden, as if someone had passed recently. At the farm, she found Mrs. Hargreaves feeding chickens, her face lined with worry. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargreaves," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "I hear there's been talk of a prowler near your barn." Mrs. Hargreaves nodded, brushing snow from her apron. "Aye, Miss Marple. Last night I saw a shadow by the barn door, moving quick, and there was a clatter, like metal on wood. John thinks it's foxes, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes soft but alert. "Did you see the figure clearly?" "Not really, but he wore a dark coat, hood up. Disappeared before I could call out." Miss Marple thanked her and circled the barn, noting fresh footprints in the snow deep, uneven as if someone carried a heavy load. They led to a side door, its lock scratched but intact. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and damp wood, but the dust on the floor was disturbed, revealing a trail to a pile of crates in the corner. She didn't touch them, but spotted a glinter metal bolt, shiny and new, out of place among the rusted tools. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind weaving possibilities. That afternoon, she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with her usual zeal. "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, adjusting her gloves, I hear about the shadow at Meadow Farm. Have you noticed any strangers in the village?" Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice low. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's unsettling. Mr. Giles saw a man near the farm 2 nights ago, dark coat, carrying a sack, looked like a city type, not local. And Jenny says a stranger's been at the Blue Boar, asking about the farm." Miss Marple nodded, encouraging her to continue. "What did Jenny say about him?" "Called himself Mr. Carter, said he was buying land, but he was too curious about the barn, not the fields. Paid with London money." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar, where Jenny, the barmaid, added another piece. "That Mr. Carter was here last night," Jenny said, wiping down the counter. "Tall, dark coat, kept his face low. Asked about the Hargreaves, said he knew them from years back. Didn't believe him too nervous." That evening, Miss Marple wrote, "The barn is hiding something, and Mr. Carter is no land buyer. The footprints, the bolt, the clatter, they point to an outsider with a purpose. I must learn what draws him." To Meadow Farm. The next day, she called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and a roaring fire, her drawing-room cozy against the snow. "Jane, you're sleuthing again," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about Meadow Farm?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff noticed any strangers near the hill? Someone with a sack, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "One of the gamekeepers, Tom, saw a man by the farm 3 nights ago, tall, dark coat, carrying a sack. He was poking around the barn, but ran off when Tom approached. Arthur thinks it's poachers, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A sack suggested something valuable, goods or evidence. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swirled more sightings of the shadow, a broken lock on the barn door, and a rumor that someone had been digging near the hayloft. She resolved to inspect the barn again. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to Meadow Farm, her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The snow was deep, but a path had been trampled to the barn. Inside, she found the crates, shifted, revealing a trapdoor beneath the hayloft, its hinges oiled and new. She didn't open it, knowing better than to disturb evidence, but noted a faint smell of tobacco, as if someone had smoked while working. Back home, she wrote, the trapdoor is the key. It's what Mr. Carter seeks or hides. The bolt and tobacco suggests recent activity, possibly illicit. I must find out what's beneath that door. The next morning, she visited the church, where Mr. Archer was polishing the pews. "Mr. Archer," she said, "you pass Meadow Farm on your way home, don't you? Have you noticed anything odd?" He nodded, setting down his cloth. "I, Miss Marple, heard a clatter from the barn 2 nights ago, like tools dropping. Saw a light inside, flickering like a lantern. Thought it was Mr. Hargreaves, but he says he wasn't there." Miss Marple thanked him, her suspicions deepening. A light and clatter suggested someone was working in the barn, likely at night too. Avoid notice. She decided to learn more about Mr. Carter, starting with the Blue Boar. Jenny confirmed he'd returned, asking about the farm's history, particularly its use during the war. Miss Marple's interest piqued. The barn had been a smuggling hub decades ago, hiding contraband in secret compartments. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records about Meadow Farm. they found a 1917 report mentioning a cache of stolen good silverware and coins hidden in the barn by smugglers, never recovered. The farm's owner at the time, a distant cousin of the Hargreaves, had been suspected but never charged. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Could Mr. Carter be after this cache? That evening, she wrote, the trapdoor likely hides the smugglers. Cache. Mr. Carter knows of it, perhaps from old records. The clatter and light suggest he's close to finding it. I must watch the barn closely. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Another lock was broken, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing two men near the barn at midnight, one carrying a shovel. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumor that the Hargreaves had found a hidden cache in the barn and moved it to the church for safekeeping. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where Mr. Carter grew visibly agitated. That night, she hid near the barn with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, two figures approached them. Tall man in the dark coat and a shorter, wiry man with a scarf. They entered the barn, their lantern casting shadows. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack. Stationed nearby, they caught the men inside, prying open the trapdoor. The tall man was identified as Henry Carter, a London dealer in stolen goods, and his accomplice was a local drifter, Sam Tate, hired for his knowledge of the farm. The trapdoor revealed a small chamber containing silverware and coins. The smuggler's cache from 1917, Carter confessed. He'd learned of the cache from old smuggling records and used the barn to search for it, staging the shadow to scare off villagers. The village buzzed with the news. The prowler exposed, but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, the barn is quiet again, its secrets uncovered. Carter's greed undid him, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more mysteries, and I'll be ready when they surface. She closed her diary, the snow falling softly outside. The village was calm, but she knew another puzzle waited, just beyond the next drift. Chapter 13. The curse of the frozen well. January of 1929 had deepened the winter's grip on St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a frost so thick that the lanes glittered like polished glass. The new year had brought a quiet resolve to the villagers, who shovelled paths and stoked fires against the biting cold. Yet, beneath this stoic calm, a new mystery was stirring, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, felt with her usual sharpness. Her diary, its leather cover, worn by years of secrets, lay open on her desk, ready to capture the latest enigma that had emerged from the village's icy heart. She dipped her pen and wrote, January 10th, 1929. The old well behind the blacksmith's shop has become the talk of the village. Mrs. Price says a strange light was seen there at midnight, and Tommy Pierce heard whispers from its depths. The villagers speak of a curse, but I suspect a human hand at work. The old well, tucked behind Mr. Giles's blacksmith shop, was a relic of St. Mary Mead's past, its stone rim weathered and its depths long dry. Local lore told of a childhood fallen in a century ago, sparking tales of a curse that haunted the well. Recent reports of a flickering light and eerie whispers had revived these stories, but Miss Marple, ever skeptical of the supernatural, knew such phenomena often masked human motives. She resolved to investigate, her curiosity as sharp as the winter wind. The next morning, she bundled up in her warmest coat and set out for the blacksmith's shop, her boots crunching through the snow. The village was hushed, with most residents. Indoors, but the path to the well was trampled, as if someone had passed recently. She found Mr. Giles hammering at his forge, his face ruddy from the heat. "Good morning, Mr. Giles," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "I hear there's been talk of odd goings-on at the well." He paused, wiping his brow. "Aye, Miss Marple. Last night I saw a light by the well flickering, like a lantern. Heard whispers, too, like voices arguing. Thought it was kids, but no one was there when I looked." Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes soft but keen. "Did you see anyone?" "Nearby, not clear, but there was a figure tall in a dark cloak, moving fast. Vanished before I could call out." Miss Marple thanked him and circled the well, noting fresh footprints in the snow deep, deliberate, leading to the wells. Rim, the cover, a heavy wooden lid, was slightly askew, and a faint scratch marked its edge, as if pried open. She peered into the darkness below, catching a whiff of damp earth and something sharper oil, perhaps. Near the rim, half buried in the snow, lay a small metal key, its shape suggesting a lockbox. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind weaving possibilities. That afternoon, she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with her usual zeal. "Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, adjusting her gloves, "I hear about the light at the well. Have you noticed any strangers in the village?" Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice low. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's eerie. Mrs. Weatherby saw a man near the well 2 nights ago, tall, dark cloak, carrying a sack. Looked like a city type, not local. And Jenny says a stranger's been at the Blue Boar, asking about the well." Miss Marple nodded, encouraging her to continue. "What did Jenny say about him?" "Called himself Mr. Ellis, said he was studying old wells for a book. But he was too curious about the blacksmith's shop, not just the well. Paid with London money." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar, where Jenny, the barmaid, added another piece. "That Mr. Ellis was here last night," Jenny said, wiping down the counter. "Tall, dark cloak, kept his face low. Asked about the well's history, said he heard it was cursed. Didn't believe him, too nervous. That evening, Miss Marple wrote, 'The well is hiding something, and Mr. Ellis is no scholar. The footprints, the key, the whispers, they point to an outsider with a purpose. I must learn what draws him to the well.' The next day, she called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and a roaring fire, her drawing room cozy against the snow. "Jane, you're sleuthing again," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about the well?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff noticed any strangers near the blacksmith's shop? Someone with a sack, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking, "One of the gamekeepers, Tom, saw a man by the well 3 nights ago, tall, dark cloak, carrying a sack. He was poking around the rim, but ran off when Tom approached. Arthur thinks it's vandals, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A sack suggested something valuable, goods, or evidence. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swirled more sightings of the cloaked figure, a broken crate near the well, and a rumor that someone had been digging in the snow. She resolved to inspect the well again. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to the well, her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The snow around the rim was now trampled, and the lid was further ajar. She peered inside, spotting a rope tied to a rusty hook, descending into the darkness. At the base, barely visible, was a canvas bag, its contents hidden. She didn't touch it, knowing better than to disturb evidence, but noted a faint smell of tobacco, as if someone had smoked while working. Back home, she wrote, the bag in the well is the key. It's what Mr. Ellis seeks, or hides. The rope and tobacco suggest recent activity, likely illicit. I must find out what's in that bag. The next morning, she visited the blacksmith's shop, where Mr. Giles let her examine the well's surroundings. She found a discarded matchbox. It's labelled from a London tobacconist, confirming an outsider's presence. She decided to learn more about Mr. Ellis, starting with the blue boar. Jenny confirmed he'd returned, asking about the well's depth, and mentioning a buyer in London. Miss Marple's interest piqued. The well was being used as a hiding place, likely for stolen goods. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records about the well. They found an 1870 report mentioning its use as a smuggler's cache during the Napoleonic Wars, hiding jewels and coins. A later article hinted at a lost stash, never recovered, rumoured to be buried in the well's depths. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Could Mr. Ellis be after this stash? That evening, she wrote, the well's history points to a hidden cache. Mr. Ellis knows of it, perhaps from old records. The whispers and light suggest he's close to finding it. I must watch the well closely. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Another crate was broken, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing two men near the well at midnight, one carrying a shovel. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumour that the Hargreaves had found a cache in the well and moved it to the church for safekeeping. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the blue boar, where Mr. Ellis grew visibly agitated. That night, she hid near the well with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, two figures approached the tall man in the dark cloak and a shorter, wiry man with a scarf. They lowered a rope into the well, pulling up the canvas bag. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught the men in the act, the bag revealing a cache of stolen jewels and coins, linked to a London heist months earlier. The tall man was identified as Victor Ellis, a known thief, and his accomplice was a local drifter, Jim Cobb, hired for his knowledge of the village. Ellis confessed. He'd learned of the well's history from smuggling records and used it to hide his loot. Staging the curse to scare off villagers, the village buzzed with the news, the curse debunked but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, the well is silent again, its secrets uncovered. Ellis's greed undid him, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more mysteries, and I'll be ready when they surface. She closed her diary, the frost sparkling outside. The village was calm, but she knew another puzzle waited just beyond the next snowflake. Chapter 14. The ghostly footsteps of Willow Lane January of 1929 had deepened the winter's hold on St. Mary Mead. With snowdrifts piling high against the cottages and a piercing wind whistling through the bare trees, the village, now settled into the quiet rhythm of the new year, was a patchwork of glowing hearths and frosted windows, with villagers bundling up to tend their daily chores. Yet, beneath this serene surface, a new mystery was stirring, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire with her knitting, sensed with her usual acuity. Her diary, its leather cover etched with the secrets of countless winters, lay open on her desk, ready to capture the latest enigma that had crept into the village. Along the shadowy path of Willow Lane, she dipped her pen and wrote, January 17th, 1929. Willow Lane is the talk of the village, with whispers of ghostly footsteps heard at dusk. Mrs. Price says a figure was seen near the old gate, and Tommy Pierce claims he found a strange coin in the snow. The villagers speak of a haunting, but I suspect a living hand at work. Willow Lane, a narrow path winding past the village's northern edge, was bordered by ancient willows that cast long, skeletal shadows in the winter light. At its end stood an old iron gate, rusted and half-hidden by brambles, leading to a disused orchard once owned by the late Mr. Clarence, a reclusive scholar who'd died a decade ago. Recent reports of footsteps echoing without a source and sightings of a fleeting figure had revived tales of Clarence's ghost, said to guard a hidden treasure. Miss Marple, unmoved by such fancies, knew that footsteps and coins pointed to human motives, not spectral ones, and she resolved to uncover the truth. The next morning, she wrapped herself in her warmest coat and set out for Willow Lane, her boots crunching through the snow. The village was hushed, with only the occasional clatter of a milk cart breaking the silence, but the lane felt eerily still, as if holding its breath. She examined the ground near the gate, finding fresh footprints in the snow-deep, uneven, as if someone carried a burden. They led through the gate into the orchard, where a faint trail of broken twigs marked a path to an old shed. She noted a scratch on the gate's lock, as if forced, and a faint smear of grease on the iron, suggesting recent handling. Miss Marple approached the shed cautiously, its door ajar and creaking in the wind. Inside, the air was damp, smelling of earth and decay, but the dust on the floor was disturbed, revealing a trail to a pile of crates in the corner. She didn't touch them, but spotted a glinter brass key, small and ornate, half buried in the dirt. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind weaving possibilities, a lockbox perhaps, or a hidden compartment. Nearby she found a scrap of paper, crumpled and stained, bearing a single word in a sharp hand. Clarence. That afternoon she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with her usual fervour. Mrs. Price, Miss Marple said, adjusting her gloves. I hear there's talk of strange happenings on Willow Lane. Footsteps, wasn't it? Mrs. Price leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Oh, Miss Marple, it's chilling. Mrs. Weatherby heard footsteps last night, clear as day, but saw no one. And Tommy Pierce found a funny coin near the gatehold, like nothing we use. It's Clarence's ghost, I tell you. Miss Marple smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. A coin, you say? Did Mrs. Weatherby see anyone nearby? She did. Now you mention it, a man, tall, in a dark cloak, near the gate 2 nights ago. Looked like a city type, carrying a sack. Vanished when she called out. Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar Inn, where Jenny the barmaid added another piece. I saw a stranger here last night, Jenny said, polishing a glass. Tall, dark cloak, kept his face low, called himself Mr. Norton, said he was studying old orchards, asked about Willow Lane and Mr. Clarence, paid with London coins. That evening, Miss Marple wrote, the footsteps and coin point to a purpose, not a ghost. Mr. Norton is no scholar. His interest in Clarence suggests a connection to the orchard. The key and paper hint at a hidden cache. I must learn what draws him to Willow Lane. The next day, she called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall. hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and a roaring fire, her drawing room cozy against the snow. "Jane, you're sleuthing again," Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. "What's this about Willow Lane?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff noticed any strangers near the lane? Someone with a sack, perhaps?" Dolly frowned, thinking. "One of the gardeners, Tom, saw a man by the gate 3 nights ago, tall, dark cloak, carrying a sack. He was poking around the orchard, but ran off when Tom approached. Arthur thinks it's poachers, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple nodded, the description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A sack suggested something valuable: documents, tools, or treasure. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swelled. More footsteps heard at dusk, a broken branch in the orchard, and a rumor that someone had been digging near the shed. She resolved to inspect the orchard again. That evening, under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to Willow Lane, her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The snow was deep, but a path had been trampled to the shed. Inside, she found the crates shifted, revealing a loose floorboard, its edges freshly pried. Beneath it was a small metal box, its lock matching the key in her pocket. She didn't open it, knowing better than to disturb evidence, but noted a faint smell of tobacco, as if someone had smoked while working. "Back home," she wrote, "the box is the key to this mystery. It's what Mr. Norton seeks, likely tied to Clarence's treasure. The footsteps and tobacco suggest recent activity, probably illicit. I must find out what's in that box." The next morning, she visited the blacksmith shop, where Mr. Giles let her examine the coin Tommy had found. It was old, from the 1850s, bearing a crest she recognized from Clarence's family records. She decided to learn more about Mr. Norton. Starting with the blue boar, Jenny confirmed he'd returned, asking about Clarence's estate and mentioning a buyer in London. Miss Marple's interest piqued. The box likely held something: valuable jewels, coins, or documents. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records about Clarence. They found a 1918 will, leaving the orchard to a nephew, Edward Clarence, who'd vanished after a family dispute. A newspaper clipping mentioned a rumoured cache of rare coins, hidden by Clarence to avoid creditors. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Could Mr. Norton be Edward, or someone he hired? That evening, she wrote, "The box likely holds Clarence's coins. Mr. Norton knows of it, perhaps from family records. The footsteps suggest he's close to finding it. I must watch the orchard closely." Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Another branch was broken, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing 2 men near the shed at midnight, one carrying a shovel. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumour that the Hargreaves had found a box in the orchard and moved it to the church for safekeeping. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where Mr. Norton grew visibly agitated. That night, she hid near the orchard with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, 2 figures approached the tall man in the dark cloak and a shorter, wiry man with a scarf. They entered the shed, their lantern casting shadows. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught the men inside, prying open the box. The tall man was Edward Clarence, and his accomplice was a London thief, Tom Vale, hired for his skills with locks. The box contained rare coins the cash Clarence had hidden. Edward confessed he'd learned of the coins from family papers and used the orchard to search for them, staging the ghostly footsteps to scare off villagers. The village buzzed with the news, the haunting debunked but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, "Willow Lane is quiet again, its secrets uncovered." Edward's greed undid him, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more mysteries, and I'll be ready when they surface. She closed her diary, the frost sparkling outside. The village was calm, but she knew another puzzle waited just beyond the next shadow. Chapter 15. The Phantom of the Frosted Glass. The winter of 1929 had tightened its icy embrace around St. Mary Mead, with snow blanketing the village in a silence broken only by the crunch of boots and the distant chime of the church clock. Chill had driven most villagers indoors, their cottages aglow with firelight as they mended tools and spun tales of warmer days. Yet, beneath this quiet routine, a new mystery was stirring, one that Miss Jane Marple, seated by her parlour fire, with her knitting, sensed with her usual clarity. Her diary, its leather cover, a silent guardian of the village's secrets, lay open on her desk, ready to capture the latest enigma that had emerged from the frosted panes of the old apothecary shop. She dipped her pen and wrote, January 24th, 1929. The apothecary shop on High Street is whispering secrets again. Mrs. Price says a light was seen in its windows at midnight, and Tommy Pierce heard a clink of glass from within. The villagers speak of a phantom, but I suspect a living hand behind these shadows. The apothecary shop, a narrow building with a faded sign reading H. Baxter, chemist, had stood empty since old Mr. Baxter's death 5 years prior. Its dusty shelves and cobwebbed counters were a relic of St. Mary Mead's past, and local lore told of Baxter's ghost, said to haunt the shop in search of a lost recipe. Recent reports of a flickering light and the sound of glass had revived these tales, but Miss Marple, ever skeptical of the supernatural, knew such signs pointed to human motives. She resolved to investigate, her curiosity sharper than the frost. The next morning, she wrapped herself in her warmest coat and set out for High Street, her boots crunching through the snow. The village was quiet, with only a few souls braving the cold, but the apothecary shop loomed dark and silent, its windows frosted over. She examined the front door, finding faint scratches around the lock, as if someone had forced it. Around the side, in a narrow alley, she found fresh footprints, deep, deliberate, leading to a back entrance. Near the door, half buried in the snow, lay a small vial, empty but smelling faintly of chemicals. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind weaving possibilities. Miss Marple circled the building, noting a broken window pane, its edges jagged and fresh. She peered inside, catching a glimpse of overturned shelves and scattered papers, as if someone had searched in haste. The air carried a sharp tang, not unlike the vial scent, suggesting recent activity. She didn't enter prudence outweighed curiosity, but resolved to learn more about the shop's recent visitors. That afternoon, she visited the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters with her usual zeal. Mrs. Price, Miss Marple said, adjusting her gloves, I hear there's talk of odd goings-on at the apothecary shop. A light in the window, wasn't it? Mrs. Price leaned forward, her voice low. Oh, Miss Marple, it's eerie. Mrs. Weatherby saw a light last night, flickering like a candle, and Tommy Pierce heard glass clinking like bottles being moved. It's old Baxter's ghost, I tell you. Miss Marple smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. Did Mrs. Weatherby see anyone nearby? She did. Now you mention it, a man, tall, in a dark overcoat, near the shop 2 nights ago. Looked like a city type, carrying a bag. Vanished when she called out. Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to the Blue Boar Inn, where Jenny, the barmaid, added another piece. I saw a stranger here last night, Jenny said, wiping down the counter. Tall, dark coat, kept his face low. Called himself Mr. Shaw. Said he was buying old properties. Asked about the apothecary shop. Said he heard it was for sale. Paid with London money. That evening, Miss Marple wrote, the apothecary shop is hiding something, and Mr. Shaw is no buyer. The footprints, the vial, the clinking glass, they point to an outsider with a purpose. I must learn what draws him to the shop the next day. She called on Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, hoping her friend's servants might have seen something. Dolly welcomed her with tea and a roaring fire, her drawing room cosy against the snow. Jane, you're sleuthing again, Dolly said, her eyes twinkling. What's this about the apothecary shop? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. Just curious, Dolly. Have your staff noticed any strangers near High Street? Someone with a bag, perhaps? Dolly frowned, thinking. One of the maids, Sarah, saw a man by the shop 3 nights, a goat-wool dark coat, carrying a bag. He was poking around the back door, but ran off when she passed by. Arthur thinks it's vandals, but I'm not so sure. Miss Marple nodded. The description aligning with Mrs. Price's. A bag suggested something valuable, chemicals, documents, or tools. She thanked Dolly and returned to the village, her mind racing. At the Women's Institute, she listened as the gossip swirled more sightings of the light. A broken crate in the alley, and a rumour that someone had been digging in the shop cellar. She resolved to inspect the shop again that evening. Under the cover of dusk, Miss Marple slipped back to High Street, her flashlight dimmed to avoid notice. The snow around the back door was now trampled, and the broken window was boarded up, as if someone had tried to cover their tracks. She found a faint trail leading to a cellar hatch, its lock newly oiled. Kneeling carefully, she lifted the hatch. A fraction, catching a whiff of chemicals stronger now, like ammonia or ether. Beneath the hatch, she glimpsed a canvas sack, its contents hidden. She didn't touch it, knowing better than to disturb evidence, but noted a faint smear of grease on the hatch, as if handled recently. Back home, she wrote, the sack in the cellar is the key. It's what Mr. Shaw seeks, likely tied to something. Illicit chemicals, perhaps, or stolen goods. The light and clinking suggest recent activity. I must find out what's in that sack the next morning. She visited the blacksmith shop, where Mr. Giles let her examine the alley. She found a discarded matchbox, its label from a London tobacconist, confirming an outsider's presence. She decided to learn more about Mr. Shaw, starting with the Blue Boar. Jenny confirmed he'd returned, asking about the shop's history and mentioning a partner in London. Miss Marple's interest piqued. The shop was being used for something. Clandestine, possibly illegal. She visited the library, where Miss Hartnell helped her unearth old records about the apothecary. They found a 1920 ledger listing Baxter's inventory, including rare chemicals used in photography and medicine. A newspaper clipping mentioned a scandal. Baxter had been suspected of selling restricted substances to a London gang, but no charges were filed. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Could Mr. Shaw be after these chemicals, or something Baxter had hidden? That evening, she wrote, the cellar likely holds Baxter's secret stock. Mr. Shaw knows of it, perhaps from old records. The light and chemicals suggest he's preparing something dangerous. I must watch the shop closely. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Another window was smashed, and Tommy Pierce reported seeing two men near the shop at midnight, one carrying a shovel. Miss Marple, sensing time was short, enlisted Dolly and Colonel Bantry to help. She suggested they spread a rumour that the vicar had found a hidden cache in the shop's cellar and moved it to the church for safekeeping. The news spread quickly, and Miss Marple watched the Blue Boar, where Mr. Shaw grew visibly agitated. That night, she hid near the shop with Colonel Bantry, who'd brought his old service revolver. At midnight, two figures approached the tall man in the dark coat and a shorter, wiry man with a scarf. They pried open the cellar hatch, their lantern casting shadows. Miss Marple signalled the colonel, who fetched Inspector Slack, stationed nearby. They caught the men inside, retrieving the canvas sack. The tall man was identified as Victor Shaw, a London chemist with ties to a smuggling ring, and his accomplice was a local drifter, Sam Holt, hired for his knowledge of the village. The sack contained vials of restricted chemicals linked to a London operation producing counterfeit medicines. Shaw confessed he'd learned of Baxter's stock from old ledgers and used the shop to retrieve it. Staging the phantom to scare off villagers, the village buzzed with the news. The ghost debunked, but the scandal alive. Miss Marple, back in her parlour, wrote, "The apothecary is silent again, its secrets uncovered. Shaw's greed undid him, as it often does. But St. Mary Mead holds more mysteries, and I'll be ready when they surface." She closed her diary, the frost sparkling outside. The village was calm, but she knew another puzzle waited just beyond the next snowflake.